We are live. And right now we're
Yeah.
talking publishing rights before the show.
You
And it's
don't have
funny.
any.
Yeah, you were just saying sometimes
Yeah. Even the Europeans,
the
because
Europeans always have
the
to credit
European.
the
Yeah.
but what's funny is here in the US, you're officially not the author, even if you
Hmm.
are.
Right.
It's the whoever hires you is legally the author of that work.
Hmm.
So it's like, Stan Lee never wrote a comic. Marvel Comics wrote a comic.
Yeah.
That's the way it works. It's like even though it says writer in the comic,
Mhm.
legally they're not the writer. That's just so
Yeah.
strange.
Mhm. Yeah. It's very rare that a corporation owns a character, although it's
Mhm.
becoming. I- They're taking. It's after the creators die that the publishers buy the characters from their
Ah,
descendants.
right,
Because I mean, the characters have been around for 50, 60 years.
right,
Everybody made money from them, including the creators.
right.
Uh, and it gets to either they die or they get old, and if, so they're 82 and they sell the rights to the full rights to the series. Of course, they keep your name as so attached to
Right,
it. Of course, even if you're not the one doing them, but the new guys are also credited.
right.
And you still have to pay them you still have to pay them royalties, although
On the old
they're
stuff?
no, not on the old stuff. They bought that lock, stock, and barrel. But
Okay,
they bought them for a couple of million.
okay.
So it's not like they paid him $130 and they keep the rights.
So, so let's just say I invent a character. It's
Mhm.
around for 50 years. I die. My
Mhm.
family sells it to
Yeah,
a publishing company. Who is a publishing company doesn't pay royalties on any of the old work. They have to pay royalties to the creator on the new work. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Because they
Okay. That
created
makes
it, unless because the French publishers work more like book publishing.
yeah.
So they have advances, they have royalties, they don't. There's no page
Imagine
rate.
that. A publisher
Yeah,
acting like a publisher.
yeah.
Well, rather than an IP house, an IP
Hmm.
farm. Good evening, Tit Goblin. It's Friday comic talking time. Yep, evening. And we'll be talking a lot of John Romita tonight.
Hmm. You do get page rate if you work for Disney, friends.
Yeah,
Because obviously in there you don't own the characters,
right.
but those are periodicals. You
Mhm.
don't create a graphic novel, so those are
Yeah.
periodicals. You draw a 9-page story and you get paid for the 9-page story. Here's a check. Bye bye.
Mhm. Yeah, Disney owns everything, don't they?
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know how Bonelli do it in Italy, because they have those are periodicals, but they don't have creative teams, because you can't draw a 100-page book every month, even if it's in digest size. It's
Uh-huh.
still too much. So they have rotating crews, and there is a creator, but he usually doesn't work on the books anymore.
Huh.
He does the first few issues, and then he comes back every once in a while. Or but apart from that, they don't have any control. It's the publisher. It's Bonelli. So I don't know if they get any royalties, because it's those are periodicals. They don't get reprinted as much. They're always reprinting texts,
Uh-huh.
but not the other series.
I wonder how it works for those like that Italian series I was buying that was made for the American market.
Well,
Does the
that
creators
seems like
own that?
that seems creator owned. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so.
Hmm. And
Interesting.
Hugo Pratt used to work for the French market, so he got paid like the French did. He owned Corto Maltese. But there's a if you look through the Grand Comics database and you look for something like uh, Corriere dei Piccoli and Giornalino, those were youth supplements that came out in the Sunday paper, and they
Uh,
had comics in them. And a few of the great Italian artists, including Hugo Pratt and Milo Manara, have stories in them. short stories usually. Nothing really. Some had ongoing characters like Hugo Pratt's Sergeant Kirk, but
Okay.
I'm not sure if they got royalties or not because the newspaper sold, not the comic. The comic just
Mhm.
came in the newspaper.
Huh. I just got an email that I actually bought a subscription to a comic
Hmm,
called The Sickness from Uncivilized Books,
hmm,
who are the ones who are doing Craig Thompson's Ginseng.
hmm,
It was just when I got like the first issue I've got of Craig Thompson's Ginseng was like issue 10.
hmm.
First issue I saw of it, first issue I got. Um, Good evening, Comic Crack. So that when I got home, I looked them up on their website to see if I could get the other issues, which I never ended up getting. But I signed up for their newsletter from Uncivilized Books. And it was sometime this end of the winter. They sent me this you could subscribe, and I think it's from the email I just got this week. I think it's from the creators themselves of the book, through Uncivilized Books. We're offering like a subscription. I think they're like $6 an issue cover price, and I think it's like a 5 issue series where I believe the subscription was right around cover price. Wasn't exact. It wasn't a lot less or a lot more either way. And they were like, if you're one of the first 200 people to subscribe, we'll send you all 5 covers to the first issue. And I was like, somehow that made me go, all right, I'll try a subscription to this. I pay $30, $40. I don't remember what it was. But then when I was at the comic shop this week, I was checking out the new books, and that was there. And I was looking through it. I'm like, oh, this looks pretty cool. Then I flipped back to see the price and see who published it. And I was like, oh, Uncivilized Books. Is this the one I have a subscription to? I couldn't even remember because it hadn't arrived yet. I was like, I think this is the one I have a subscription, so I didn't buy it. And then I got home, and the next day I got an email from the creators of the book saying, we're going to be sending out your subscription copies. I was like, cool. So I just got as we're sitting here, I see an email came in with the tracking number for my subscription. So I should be getting 5 copies of number 1 with 5 covers on it. I was like, all right, I'll be one of the, because it's like, I was like, it was basically buying them for cover price. So. And getting 5 comics for the price of 1 with, I think, I was trying to, I'm like, am I really getting 5 comics for the price of 1 with that? I couldn't really figure it out from their description. It was one of those things. I'm reading the words. I'm like, are they really going to send me 5 copies of the same comic with different covers? Like, let's see. So that was it. Part of it was curiosity, but Sickness is the name of the book from Uncivilized Books. Like I said, I saw the black and white book, really sort of fine lines, scratchy artwork, as I remember. But I would have bought issue number 1 just seeing it on the stands. But I was reminded that I think I have a subscription to that. I haven't had a subscription to comics since I was in high school, because I used to get subscriptions when I was a kid for like Christmas and birthdays. I had a subscription to Jack Kirby's Captain Victory comics before I even was going to the comic shop regularly. Are they sending you 1 comic and 4 loose covers? I don't know. Maybe they are. I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I think they're sending me 5 comics. Well, I don't know. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna, because like I said, it was the same price as if I had paid cover price for all of them. So I was just like, all right, let me see. Let me see what they send me. I don't know. I picked up Xeno today, Jared, after seeing it in your Wednesday video. Shaky Kane and that sucker. Yeah, that was a good one. That was where is it? I just saw It was funny. The Image comics didn't make it into my shop this week, so I'll have to pick them up next week. But I saw this one, which isn't Zinc. That's an O at the end, so it's Xeno. Um, and there was like 4 different covers, but I liked this one with the weird people in the machine in there. But it's an anthology, 4 stories in it. Who does them? And it was well done. I enjoyed it. I think that's only 3 or 4 issues, so I'm gonna put it on my list. We got written by Melissa Flores, illustrated by Daniel Irazi. Never heard of him, but he's good. Written by Jordan Thomas, illustrated by Shaky Kane. Written and illustrated by Phil Hester. Written by Christopher Condon, illustrated by Nick Cagnetti. And it was a fun series. It was just sort of little short story. I really liked 3 out of the 4 stories, which is always good. I guess you'd call them weird sci-fi horror stories. Some nice artwork, good coloring. There's some Shaky Kane. But yeah, I'm gonna definitely put it on my pull list and pick up the next few issues. I enjoy a good anthology. It was I think they said it was 40 pages and $6. So not from Oni Press, but yeah, pretty good one. I also picked up speaking of John Romita having passed on, we got some John Romita stuff for you tonight too, talking about facsimile edition of Amazing Spider-Man 121 with Romita inks, Gil Kane pencils, and John Romita inks on this one. Some classic John Romita. Here's something I was thinking about with John Romita. I grabbed that Shaky Kane cover, the baby with the VR helmet. Okay. I don't remember that one specifically. I just remember that was the one I liked best in them. The 5 comics and cover sounds like a paper you mix up while back where they keep sending you separate pieces, and also packages of paper that you get 25 comics, 5 of each cover. Yeah, I have no idea what I'm getting. I think I'm getting 5 comics, each with a different cover. They could just be sending me 1 comic and 5 and 4 covers, tear sheets. I don't even know. I couldn't quite figure it out. But for those of you who don't know, John Romita died this week at 93. Shaky Kane, no relation. There's Darren. If you want to come on and chat with us, Darren, go right ahead. I worked with John Romita from 1990 to 1996 when I was at Marvel, and he was at Marvel too. He and Virginia both retired in 1996. And here's the nicest guy in the world. You'll see nothing but there's to me, I've only heard of 3 nice guys in comics. 3 guys who you never hear a bad word of, because you always hear bad words about everybody in comics. You'll hear bad words about me from someone, I'm sure of it. John Romita, Joe Sinnott, and George Takei are like the 3 you always hear everybody say nice things about. They're the nicest guys in the world. And John for sure, distant cousins. John, and I'll be telling some nice guy John Romita stories over the years. But I have an observation about his place in comics. I think he's got, like, to me, Joe Kubert has a unique place in comics. In that I think Joe Kubert was an A-level talent with no real A-level comic books. But his influence, especially due to the Joe Kubert school, is tremendous. Not just his artwork, but everybody who came through that Joe Kubert school loved him. Says nothing but nice things about Joe Kubert. So I think he's kind of got I think his influence is more than his artwork. Most comic book artists' influence is their artwork. There's Darren. Good evening, Darren. How are you doing?
Hey there.
Oh, 1 second. Hey guys, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm talking about. I'm talking about my
John.
ideas of. We're talking John Romita now. My idea of John Romita's like place in comic book history. First of all, the first everybody loves the man. He's that's not even in dispute. John Romita, the man, is just a stand-up guy. Everybody loves him. But I think his influence in comics is bigger than his comics in terms of like if you were to ask me, JR Jr. is my comic book Spider-Man artist. Yeah, there's if you were to ask me if I like John Romita's art, yes, I love John Romita's art. If you were to ask me what my favorite John Romita comic was, I don't know that I have one. I think John Romita, to me, John Romita was a better artist than a comic book artist. And what I mean by, and I also heard someone say that this week that he's an underrated Silver Age artist, and that got me to thinking. I think they're right because nobody, John Romita is his art is most beloved by Spider-Man fans of a certain age.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were a Spider-Man fan who grew up with John Romita art, he's your guy. He's your Spider-Man, and there's a lot of people like that. There's a lot of people who, because Spider-Man was their most popular book. It only grew more popular under John Romita. So I think if you ask, the people of that certain age, that's why they love John Romita's artwork, is his Spider-Man. But outside that age, outside that one group, I don't know if there's a large group of John Romita fans of his art.
Well, when I started reading, Romita was no longer drawing comics on a regular basis.
Right.
So I did read the occasional out of sequence story from the Silver Age.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was stuff that he inked, especially when he inked John Jr. When he started on Amazing Spider-Man. And in fact, probably the story that I read that was the biggest influence on me was Monica Rambeau's first appearance, because that was Senior over Junior. And it was Junior layouts, but you could tell it, the finished product looked a lot like Senior.
Mm-hmm.
But apart from that, I mean, I started reading Spider-Man shortly before John Jr. became the regular on Amazing, and there was always, of course, a lot of rotation in the Spider books. But Keith Pollard, Jim Mooney, Sal Buscema, they were drawing Romita's Spider-Man. It was easily identifiable as Romita's Spider-Man.
Right.
And we also had Spider-Man in The Amazing Friends. And so even if I didn't read if I wasn't reading the regular Stan Lee, John Romita, Amazing Spider-Man from the late 60s, I was always seeing Romita's Spider-Man because everyone was drawing him.
Mm-hmm. His influence as an artist outstripped his comic book work. Like you said, everybody was drawing Romita. To me, I grew up in the late 70s Spider-Man, which really wasn't very special. To me, Spider-Man was just another superhero. But then I read I find when I was 10 or 12, I got the little pocket books with the Steve Ditko Spider-Man. And that was the first time I got to read the Steve Ditko Spider-Man, and it blew me away. So to me, even though I'm born 15 years too late for the Ditko Spider-Man. There's the Ditko Spider-Man and everything else to me. There's like, that's my Spider-Man, is the Ditko Spider-Man, even though, like I said, I came to it way, way late. Like the John Buscema Spider-Man, I mean the John Romita Spider-Man was sort of like my old-fashioned Spider-Man that I was reading in Marvel Tales. And the Spider-Man I was reading fresh off the stands was oh god, his name just flew out of my head. Ross Andru's Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Which I know some people my age who love the Ross Andru Spider-Man. And I know people who just a few years older who grew up on the Romita Spider-Man who hate the Ross Andru Spider-Man. But to me, that was, Ross Andru Spider-Man was okay. It was just kind of the default Spider-Man. It looked very, like you said, he was drawing John Romita's Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So John Romita's like influence kept going as time, and also his being that he was in the Marvel offices working as, that's another weird thing we're going to discuss, art director. I put that in quotes because we all know Stan Lee was in fact the art director. Darren, that's one thing I discovered reading this book is Stan Lee in the early 60s, even when John Romita came, the reason John Romita wasn't hired as art director when he came on board in the 66, was it? Was because Stan Lee was collecting two salaries, one as editor-in-chief and one as art director. He testified to it in 2010. I never knew that because I always heard that he was the de facto art director. No, he was in fact the art director. He got a salary.
According to payroll, yeah.
But yeah, according to Stan Lee's testimony under oath.
Yeah, it's funny. Of the Romita family, Romita Sr. is the last name I was aware of. I knew of Virginia before of John Sr. because here's why. Because I started collecting comics arguably in '86. I say arguably because I had some comics like Star Wars comics years prior, but '86 is when I was going to comic stores and that whole thing. And in Bullpen Bulletins, Virginia was mentioned as being like the whip cracker, like the beloved kind of maybe den mother. I don't know if that's a good but who kept the bullpen in line and assigning work and all that stuff. And of course, I knew John Jr.'s name because that was '86 is when he was on Uncanny at that point. That's my first real issues of Uncanny, right? In '86, also started buying Marvel Tales, as you mentioned, right? And so I wasn't even aware what Marvel Tales was. I knew it had a little thing at the top of the cover saying, collector's item issue. I didn't realize what they're referring to was the original printing of that versus this reprint. But my first issue, Marvel Tales, was the one that reprinted. I forget which original issue it was of Amazing. It was with the Vulture cover, with you seeing Vulture from behind with the big perspective. It's the one that I see Joe Jusko referring to a lot as his favorite Romita Sr. cover. So that's how I first maybe knew Romita Sr.'s art, aside from growing up with it, whatever was used for licensing in the 70s growing up, right? But I have heard McFarlane say many times, like, if you close your eyes and think of Spider-Man, like you're seeing Romita's Spider-Man. That's like he defined the look of the character to this day, I suppose. Right?
And that's another thing. When I say I think John Romita is a better artist than a comic book artist, what I mean by that is he has come up with some of the most memorable images with Spider-Man, and his covers are terrific, and even his in-story images are good. It's like that Mary Jane image, face it, tiger, you hit the jackpot. That's
that's the iconic panel
everywhere all the time.
But so many covers and panels of Peter Parker walking away from the costume and the garbage can. That was Romita.
Right. Another one. Yeah. But no one even knows what happened in that Mary Jane story.
Right. Yeah.
Like, what issue did it come from? No one knows. They just know that panel because it's so memorable and it's so well done. Like you said, him walking away from the with the costume and the garbage. By the way, I can't remember who did it now. Maybe it was Marcos Martin. Someone did the 180-degree view of that cover. They drew it really nicely done.
Mhm.
It was a street view, and you see a bunch of people walking down the street, and you say Peter Parker walking out of the alleyway, and back in the alleyway, you can see the costume in the trash can.
They recreated that shot in the second Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire second.
Oh,
movie.
yeah?
Yeah, like, because he had, for a time in the movie, he gave up like the the whole thing and da. I'm almost embarrassed to say, but I'm okay with it. When I was interning first, in 93, 94. Remember, I wasn't interning the bullpen in editorial. I was up in marketing, but I'd make it down bullpen as much as I could because of the fun factor, right? Don't even know if I was aware that Romita Sr. was in an office there as an art director.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I knew that.
Wow.
Because it's something.
Why would you unless someone told you?
I don't know how much that was played up in the comics, like in bullpen bulletins, like how I knew Virginia's name. It was, and then I probably found out sometime during that. And I was like, wait, John Romita Sr. is in the building, like right down the hallway there. And but then you start to hear the stories of like how hundreds, thousands of people have come through Marvel, either as on staff or freelancers, were so affected in a good way, so affected by him, and his kind of mentoring humbleness. I don't know. There's so many adjectives you could use, right?
That's another reason why I think his place in comics is unique and bigger than the comics he did, was because he was art director at Marvel. He did a lot of the covers in the 70s, especially, and he would mentor anyone who came through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as he was always willing to give young artists time. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you something that I've got in my files from Ed Meyer, my friend, who he used to. I never really had John critique my work or anything like that. But my friend Ed, I would always watch.
Right.
He would often ask John to critique his work. And John would throw a piece of tracing paper down over what Ed was drawing and show him what he was doing wrong and show him what he was doing right and show him how he could do it. And it was always fascinating.
I am very appreciative of that, and I forget who. You'll remember the name Jared. There's a video on YouTube. Who walked around the bullpen on their last day of work?
Sergio Carrillo.
Sergio. It's probably in that video because he walks around for a long time. He swings into, I'm pretty sure, John Romita Sr.'s office, and JR sitting there with him, and they're just kind of shooting the shit. But there's not a whole lot of video. Like in a native habitat, I think of, Marvel artists at all, like, bullpenners at all. So seeing that, I think it's pretty special, actually, that was captured, and
the age before the smartphone.
Yeah. And you talk about like, why isn't he as known is not a good word, but like he was not, am I right in this? He was
Why is he underrated?
He wasn't a self-promoter. He wasn't like, in terms of his way Stan Lee was, or certainly like the generations after were.
And also, I think because Spider-Man was his sort of masterwork.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of a very limited period. And he did have a day job.
Mm-hmm.
So after a certain point, though he did do comics, his influence was more in being art director. And like I said, his image making to me is terrific. I love most of his covers. That cover, that Spider-Man, which I only saw like 10 years ago for the first time. Spider-Man, I don't know, 53 or something, with Medusa tying him up with her hair. Let me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just remembering a short run on Captain America he did in the 70s.
You're right.
And It is a short run. It introduces the Falcon's new costume, the red
Mhm.
one,
Mm-hmm.
and then Sal Buscema takes over.
He did some nice
And
covers for it too.
It did some. Yeah, the covers were Romita. But one thing I noticed is that Romita could fit an action scene into a very small panel,
Yeah.
and then Buscema comes in and he does everything big. Because that even before the Hulk, he'll like to do. There's a scene where he introduces the ultimate sleeper, the Red Skull's ultimate sleeper, and that thing is a very giant robot. But there's kind of a contrast in the fight scenes between what Romita was doing and Sal was doing.
And the sequence with Spider-Man buried in the metal rubble with the water coming down on him. That's
Ditko.
That's a Ditko.
That's
Ditko.
Ditko. Okay,
Yeah.
that was probably okay. But it's amazing that we between the Mary Jane panel and the Spider-Man walking away from the
Right.
costume, it's like you think of certain panels that are iconic over covers. I'm sure I'd have to go through his catalog of covers that I did. For
That's Spider-Man swinging straight forward on I forget which cover it was that they used for licensing art forever.
Sure, I probably saw his art altered the '70s on a bunch of Spidey stuff. Like I'd have to go back and look at like the stuff they really kind of isolated for licensing, but it's
right.
Probably. I mean, it's probably right up there with the level that they use Jose Luis Garcia Lopez's style guide stuff for.
Jose Garcia Lopez officially did a whole bunch of licensing art for the licensors,
specifically for that style guide.
I don't know if I don't know if John Romita ever did that, or they were just taking John Romita.
I don't think so, but my comparison is that like his stuff was used possibly at the same level, and not it wasn't specifically made for that. It just happened to suit it so well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but that's like his place in history is kind of unique because, like I said, I think it has to do with his biggest fans are only from like a 5-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And that's partly because he was a staff artist. After he stopped drawing Spider-Man, he didn't have a regular book all through the 80s and 90s. He did stuff here and there, but he wasn't sort of he never really had the chance to make a mark besides that Spider-Man stuff.
One of my favorite covers
and things.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite covers of all time is the Art Adams classic X-Men 1, just that giant team, with a white background. And I'm pretty sure that I've seen that Art Adams had original layout, and then John Romita Sr. stepped in and like said this would work better, and basically did the layout for it.
That's where his influence comes, much like Joe Kupert's influence came from having a school and being a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
John Romita's influence came from being Marvel's art director and mentoring the younger. Matter of fact, let me show you. Let me see if I can let me get this. I'll show you my friend Ed's, what he would do. Where is it? Okay, there we go. Let me see if I can present. Share screen. Window. There we go. There is a John Romita. That's a John Romita Punisher, but it's right on top of Ed was trying to do it. Let's zoom in on close. Ed was trying to do a Punisher pinup, and he wasn't getting it. He wasn't quite getting it right. And he brought it to John Romita, and John just threw a piece of tracing paper over it and showed him how everything should, like, there's the, I remember Ed wasn't getting this hand up here. He was, because he was having him reach back and grab this ledge as he was shooting. So he wasn't quite getting that hand right. So, show him a grip. There's John Romita. And this is from like 1990, I think it is.
Mm.
And you can see it's a terrific drawing. He just, and he, Ed had sort of the basics right, but he wasn't getting the details. The figure wasn't solid enough. The muscles weren't quite in the right place. He wasn't getting that hand going back. I wish I had I don't think I have a copy of Ed's actual finished pieces. I think Jack Abel inked, and it ran somewhere in 1990 in some Punisher book.
Did John Romita Sr. have a regular inker he worked with, or was it just all over the place?
I don't know if he had well, he worked on Spider-Man. He who was it? Gil Kane he worked with. So they flopped around. Like sometimes Romita would ink, sometimes Romita would pencil. Did Jim Mooney ink him too? Like sometimes Jim Mooney would pencil and Romita would ink.
Yeah, during the late 70s, early 80s, I think there's some Jim Mooney. Let me check here. 78, because
I thought that was the early 70s. I'm thinking of.
No, Jim Mooney wasn't doing stuff in the early 70s because Gil Kane was the regular.
Oh, okay, so it was Kane. Like I just remember, like sometimes Romita would be inking, and sometimes someone would be inking him on Spider-Man. You'd never know.
Yeah, there's some. Yeah, Romita came back, and it's mostly himself inking.
Okay.
Yeah, Jim Mooney inked Ross Sandro here. And then in the 70s and 80s, Mike Esposito inked, and Frank Springer inked Jim Mooney.
But lots of people have like tracing paper drawings from John Romita over their drawings. Because if you would ask him for a critique, that's what he'd do. Throw a piece of tracing paper over it and show you. But he did that whole drawing, John Romita. He didn't just do a little piece.
Yeah,
he drew the whole Punisher figure.
Yeah. Here it is. Romita Mooney. 1968.
Okay.
A few, throughout 68, going on 68 and 69 is already. Then John Buscema comes in and Jim Mooney keeps on inking. But before Mooney, he had Mike Esposito.
Okay.
And then you get into all the artists who had short stints at Marvel as Romita's Raiders, right?
Oh,
so,
yeah. Let's not forget them.
Yeah,
I just saw Steve Geiger posted on Facebook. I think Steve Geiger was one of the first Romita's Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know what Romita's Raiders were, there was an apprentice program that started, I think, in the early 80s, and they infamously got paid whatever the minimum wage was, which was like $6 an hour.
Sure. Yeah.
So they were always looking for work. They were like the worst paid people at Marvel. The Romita's Raiders.
Fortunately, it was a good time though to springboard into actually, like my favorite pencil of all time, Kevin Maguire, came out of that program. I don't think he was in it for long because he got an offer from DC and then Marvel countered, then DC countered again, which was Justice League. But that's the name that I always think of. But I knew Steve a little bit in summer 93 when I was interning. But I remember the Raiders, I think, being downstairs in the 9th floor for at least that time. But maybe
no, they were up on the Raiders were when I was there in the 90s.
Yeah,
they were like John Romita had his. This is before they redid the 10th floor, so it's like 90 to 92.
Before I got there. Mm-hmm.
John Romita had an office where, as you came up on the elevators into the lobby, the main lobby, you'd turn right, and John Romita's office would be in that corner over there.
Yep.
And he had a small office, and right next to him was an even smaller office with 3 drawing tables and 3 Raiders. when they redid the 10th floor
That become a copy room
in 92,
mm-hmm.
they made that whole area John Romita's office. So there was no longer tables
Mm-hmm.
for the Raiders, but they made the actual bullpen bigger.
Got it. Okay.
And all the way against the back wall where the back elevators were like 4 desks where Romita's Raiders now sat. And in front of them, do you remember where Jack Abel and Flo and George Russo sat?
I remember very clearly where George sat in that corner.
George was in one. Well, he was in 2 spots.
Yeah.
Because this was I think maybe later on.
Mm-hmm.
Right next to Virginia Romita's office, there was a big open area.
Mm-hmm.
As you faced Virginia's office, on the right was like a big open area. Flo sat there. Jack Abel sat there. I think eventually they moved George in there too. But next to that was another small office that Steve Geiger
mm-hmm.
had, and then Darren Auk had, who were both assistant art directors to.
I see.
So the Raiders sat right in front of Steve Geiger's office. So now John Romita was all the way across the way, and the Raiders were out in the bullpen, and Geiger and later Darren Auk, both assistant art directors, had that office out off the bullpen.
My second internship in 94, because now I'm remembering better, and that might have been when Marvel's headcount was at an all-time high.
Yes.
Okay. So my second internship is when the marketing department moved down to the 9th floor. And on 9th floor, there was a handful of editorial, because I remember Mindy Newell and Sarah Mossoff being down there, and some other editors,
right.
And then Steve, and then there was a mini kind of bullpen. I'm talking a few desks, like in a little open area. And I got the impression some of them might have been some of the Raiders, maybe not. Maybe there's some bullpenners that had to move down, just doing art corrections and that kind of stuff, paste up. But that's how I knew Steve from that second internship down there. Right. But I didn't mean to tangent off of.
We like tangents.
Yeah.
Finally, an admission that 77 Spider books were nothing special. Yeah, they were nothing special. Like I said, I grew up and that was my era of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd always read, because I read all the history I could, like the origin books, whatever I could get my hands on. I loved comic book history. I loved the process of comic books. I loved learning about making comic books. And I'd always hear, and there was a lot of people who really thought Spider-Man was special. But the books I were reading right around issue 170, let's say I started, were okay. I enjoyed them, but they were okay. And like I said, it wasn't until I read the Ditko issues that I went, oh, this is why people think Spider-Man is special. I get it now. Wilson, where are you? Tom, Wilson is traveling tonight, so he won't be with us. R.I.P. John Romita. Yep.
I need to go look at more of his painted work. I know he did, some of the covers of Origins and Son of Origins and some of the books.
I'll show you one of my favorite covers that's no one else's favorite cover. Let me find it here. Where is it? There we go. Ah, crap. I got to get it the right size. How to present it properly. Oh, this new freaking bar in Photoshop. It's driving me crazy. Okay, let me share this one with you. This is Omega the Unknown, number 6. Like I said, this is no one else's favorite cover but mine. There we go. Omega the Unknown, number 6. Romita and Cockrum.
I don't know if I've ever seen. I mean, I know the book, but I don't know if I've ever seen this cover. I probably only know the first cover of this series.
And this cover fascinated me as a kid, because, like I said, I loved comics. I loved the fact that human beings made comics. Because like I discovered, I'm told from like Greg Schiegel that I discovered earlier than most that people made comics. I was following like artists from the age of 10 when I discovered that Sal Buscema and Herb Trimpe were two different guys. That's why the Hulk looked different around issue 201, 202. But this series, this Omega the Unknown series, to me was a lesson in comic book making. Because I didn't buy it off the stands. I must have gotten it like in the name. I think it ran 10 issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I got all 10 issues at once. Someone in the neighborhood, I must have bought them from someone in the neighborhood. The old kids network of comic book sales.
I was going to say it sounded like a flea market find, but that would make sense too.
There was the way I used to get back issues, no flea markets, no nothing like that. You'd hear some kid in the suburbs here, a couple neighborhoods away, was selling comics. You'd get on your bike, you'd go over to his street, you'd see some kids playing on the street. You'd say, "We hear there's someone selling comic books on this street." And they'll go, "Oh, that's Billy up at number 14. You'd go to number 14, you'd knock on their door. His mother would answer, and we'd say, "We hear Billy's selling comics." And she'd go, "Billy, there's some kids here to buy comics." And Billy they invite you in. Billy would bring his comics out, and you'd buy them from him. That's how I got back issues in the mid to late 70s. And not just once, many times.
That's amazing.
I'm
sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
This must have come in one of those because
Yeah.
I got all 10 issues at once. But if you've never read Omega the Unknown, first of all, I liked the series in general because I liked the weird out there Marvel stuff. But it was like, I think Steve Gerber and was it Mary Screens were the writers in the movie?
Mm-hmm.
I think Jim Mooney drew the early issues, speaking of Jim Mooney. But what's weird is it clearly wasn't a success. It only lasted 10 issues. So when I got it, I knew it wasn't a success. In the letters pages, you could kind of even track that it wasn't a success. And they even like twice tried to sort of like revamp the series. Because clearly it wasn't a success. Something was. They even brought in a team for like an issue besides Gerber to try to redo it. And this cover is the perfect example. This, like I said, it fascinated me as a kid because this cover is the perfect example of them really trying to sell this series as sort of an exciting superhero series, featuring a scene not even remotely like this inside. First of all, you see this guy here. What's he saying? I may seem like a pushover, but I even feel the power of the wrench. When I say there is not a scene even remotely like this inside, the wrench wasn't even this guy wasn't even called the wrench. He wasn't a supervillain. He was just like a plumber down on his luck who had to do bad things. So this cover itself turned it into this. I mean, that's you want to read that story. Turned it into this glorious bout between this guy called the Wrench and Omega the Unknown with this red-haired woman in danger. It's like, this issue couldn't be further from what happened on this cover. But they do to me, it was like, oh, they're using this cover. I'm like, they're using this cover. That's when I knew they were using this cover just to sell the book. They weren't even trying to match we've always heard, the cover doesn't match what's on the inside, but this really didn't match what was.
Is he drawing Spider-Man at this point?
No, this is past. This is probably 76, 77.
What is he up to at this point? Is he an art director at this point?
He's an art director.
Oh, he is already there. Okay.
Probably just drawing covers. I don't know what year he drew that Captain America stuff.
74, 75.
Okay, so it was after that even. But this is just like, the logo's great. corner, but this to me is just a top-notch, well-done cover that was
71.
just made to try and sell this book, and it just everything about. I just love everything about this cover. It's just perfectly composed. It's a memorable image, and it's like completely. No one even cares. No one even cares about this cover but me. But I just as an example of like the yeoman's work that Romita had to do in his career.
It's I'm pretty sure, because I've read it, that he and Virginia co-retired like together like in early 96, right after the real implosion, somewhere 96 maybe. Okay. And let's say he was on staff, or maybe both of them, but at least he was on staff, by the mid 70s, right around this time. Okay. 20 years, we know in this day and age, at any company, to make it 3 years is often miraculous, right? Just the way the work works now. But to be I've always had kind of like this optimistic. I mean, it's be gone now, but like it's kind of feeling like it would have been so nice to be at a company, one that you love, and you love the environment, and for enduring time. That's why. I get there as an intern at the tail end of the bubble, and then the shit hit the fan, right? But that's why when I hear the stories of, especially in the 80s, leading into early 90s during the salad days of it, the rise, the whole thing, like it's like and reading about it in bullpen bulletins, all that. It seems like now some of that might be just fantasy, but it seemed like such a wonderful environment, and it depends on your job and your role, but. But such a positive time.
I always say that my job was actually pretty crappy, but the experience was good.
Right.
Because I like
that goes a long way, though. That goes a long way.
It does. Oh, he was asking you about your
covers.
When you're referring to the painted Romita work, probably covers. I only saw
covers for short, and possibly a poster or two, because I think I seem to remember a Spidey Green Goblin painted something he did.
Dolphin the wrench tool. Good idea. Love Omega the Unknown, the Lethem series too. Oh, that I have a hardcover of that. That's pretty good, because like I said, the Omega the Unknown wasn't a particularly popular series. It did have its fans like me, and the one guy, the two Lethem, and
that was a big deal.
It was in the
at least I told it was a big deal.
Yeah, 15 years ago now.
Yeah, it was 2000.
It was mostly a tribute series they did. It was like a 4-issue prestige series, and it really wasn't a reimagining of. It was kind of telling the same story as Omega the Unknown, but sort of as a coherent whole graphic novel, rather than a piecework series.
That was around 04, 05, and that was, during that wave of Marvel aggressively bringing in writers from other media.
Ah, okay. It was that long ago.
Right, because I'll tell you why I remember it, because do you remember Ruwan, who worked at Marvel?
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
Really nice guy. We hung out a bit, but I think one of his roles there was really to bring in writers who are well known in other, and this is how you get your Reggie Hudlin of the world, and
J. Michael Straczynski.
Yeah, and playwrights. I forgot his name. Roberto Acosta. I'm trying to think of the names. Who grew up as fanboys. They just worked in other mediums, and they were like dying to play in the sandbox, right? So I remember Rowan telling me that is it Jonathan Lethem? Is that his name?
I think so.
I do know of him. That's okay. But he told me it was a big deal. And I'm like, oh, was he working? He goes, Omega the Unknown. And I was like, which I knew what it was, but you know what? If you do whatever you want with this obscure, Z-list.
I forget who the artist was, but he was an indie artist who I like.
Yeah. I have a lot of respect for it. It's like them taking chances like that.
It was really, the whole graphic novel was like a love letter to Omega the Unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Screens. Okay, she was the co-writer on Omega the Unknown. First encounter with Rami's work was probably the cover for 18 number 2.
I had no idea he did those covers.
Like he said, yeoman. He did a yeoman's job. He did a lot of stuff that. Oh, I thought it was later, like maybe 08.
It might have been. It might have been signed though. It might have been 2008. It might have been signed earlier though, and not come out for a couple of years. That's very
yes.
possible.
I think you're right. Crack. Farrell Dalrymple was the artist on it. He was an artist. Yeah, Farrell Dalrymple. Yeah.
Now I got to see if Romita Senior did all the. There's 3 issues of the A Team. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't wonder if he did all of them. And one of my memories was buying issue 3, the last issue, because at the airport going to like Disney World or something, like in like 1983, 4, somewhere in there. And I love the A Team on TV, so I'm like, oh my god, there's an A Team comic. But like, now I got to see if he did all those covers. Yeah. Is there anyone else from that era? You could, from Marvel. That's a long era. I'm talking about your Romita Seniors, your Jack Abels, your George Rousseau's, like that kind of
the Silver Age guy. Well, George Rousseau, the Golden Age guy.
Yeah,
there's
guard
not a lot
who
of
then was
Silver
a
Age
Marvel.
guys left. Larry Lieber,
who's Stan's brother. Right? Yeah.
Who else is out there still?
Well, of that guard though, actually did work at Marvel. I mean, obviously Flows.
Don Perlin.
Don Perlin still around.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've watched, there's in the last like 10, 15 years, I've watched a lot of Romita Senior on YouTube because, he'd show up in interviews tied into whatever movie was coming out at the time. Right. So he was remember him in a Jack Kirby documentary in more recent years, could have been 20 years ago, but still more recent years.
Yeah.
So that's how, and so again, I probably had never had any conversation with the guy because I wasn't an editorial or a bullpenner, but I gained the respect after I was there, just from not realizing, let's say
everybody at Marvel has a story about John Romita helping them out.
Yeah.
Everybody. Pretty sure he did. Was the OG Omega finished in the Defenders comic? Oh, and it was terrible. Yeah. It was terrible. Yeah, there was the same creative team for all 3 issues of Omega. The red A Team cover was my first comic ever. Wow.
Huh. I know that. Yeah.
Number 1. Wow. Yeah, everybody who came through Marvel has a John Romita story about him doing something nice for them. Like here's. I've showed this before. I guess I'm getting all my John Romita stories in the same place. Marvel Age 93. Let me share where is
while you look for that, the first Marvel Age Omnibus is coming out sometime, and then
I saw that. I was like, how crazy is that?
It is amazing they're doing that. I will not buy that one, but I will buy if they do a volume 2, because that covers where I started kind of reading it. It was, pre-Wizard. This is like a wealth of information.
Oh,
I just love, profiles of creators and what was coming up. It was just a great snapshot in time.
Okay, this one is from,
go ahead.
Flashback to Jared in 1990. And here are some of my practice inks. They're the exact ones. I lost the pencils to them now. Here, this is a Gene Colan book, and what we used to have to do, if you wanted to practice ink, we'd get photocopies of pencils, which of course we had a vast supply of, because working in the bullpen, pasting balloons down, every page came with a photocopy of the pencils. Mm-hmm. I wish I had saved more of them, but, if I'd saved every photocopy of pencils, I would have been overwhelmed pretty quickly with pencils, with photocopies. So this is vellum tracing paper. You can see through it. Mm-hmm. Get it at the right angle there. You can see through it. So if you wanted to practice your inking in the, early 90s and before and after, you would get I got a sheet of Gene Colan pencils and throw some vellum over it. And then I'd practice my inking with brush and India ink. And I've got, 50 of these various different pages practicing my inking. So one day in 1990, I don't know if it must have been lunchtime. I wasn't there after work much. I was just sitting there practicing my inking, and Barry Dutter, who was one of the editors on Marvel Age at the time, is like, "What you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, just practicing some inking." And was looking for some articles from Marvel Age, and he's like, "Oh," he's like, "How about, can I borrow those from you? And I'm going to show them to John Romita and have him give you a critique, and we can have an article on Marvel Age." I was like, "Sure." Why not? Even though I was like, ooh, I was a little intimidated by John Romita critique. But then let me show you the actual, I took a scan of the actual pages so it's easier to see. But here is present, share screen window. There we go. Here are the actual pages in the book. Wow, that looks so old now and wrinkled and yellow. But let me zoom in. Here it says, here's some of Jared's inking samples. Photocopy, and just John Romita gives a little, a few words about it over here.
Is the intro to this cool, like legit? The first paragraph where you were showing samples, was that made up for the
Jared was at the convention showing, oh yeah, I wasn't at a convention showing off his sample. No, that's all. I don't know where that came from. I was in the bullpen. Maybe they didn't want to say.
It's kayfabe, as the guys would say. Yeah.
Yeah. But Jared saying, he maintained a lively line and avoided overworking the technique, easy to succumb to. Yeah. Good sense of scale of brushstrokes to be reduced 60%. Yeah. However, he lost some of the bone structure for the subtle expressions and gestures. Crucial to inking. You need to know, yeah. He probably meant for it to be, yeah. John added, it's difficult to get across some of the subtleties of pencils and inks, especially with a penciler like Colin. Turning soft pencil into black and white ink isn't easy, but Jared seems to have a good knack for it. So, send your new. But yeah, that was just, I actually have a nice little written critique by John Romita. So that's a nice. Who
do you think colored this?
I don't know. Whoever was the whoever was the colorist for Marvel Age was probably. Let me take that. Let me look and see if it.
Would that even be a credit in there for the colorist for?
In these Marvel Ages, they credited everyone. Like they actually credited the bullpen in this. This is the only place the bullpen was credited. Yeah, John Romita, art director, Don Perlman, managing art director. Oh, Joe Rosas, Mickey Ritter, and Brad Van Cotto were the Raiders. So you know who the Raiders were. Virginia, production manager. Then over here, Joe Albello, the whole Jared Osborne. I'm in with the production people. Greg Wright is the colorist. So Greg Wright must have colored those pages.
Mm-hmm. As an aside, is the back cover there have the birthday calendar? Yeah, there
the calendar.
The reason I love those because you get to learn all names of people who you've never heard of before who are like on staff, right?
Yeah.
But maybe like 10, 12 years ago, I took one of those calendars, scanned it, and I pulled a prank on someone and I doctored it in Photoshop to make it look like someone worked on staff who didn't. Like I said, like happy birthday to whoever I was, whatever name I put in there, and they're like, because they claim this person never worked on staff, and so I said, nope, I have evidence to the contrary, which I fabricated.
But that's another example of John would help out. Barry is like, hey, we got a, can you give a little critique of these? And John's probably like, sure. Spent 15, 20 minutes giving him a critique, and everything was good. He's always willing to help out. Get a couple pages in Marvel Age for helping Barry out. No problem.
I wonder. He seems like a guy who was so kind-hearted and humble that like you couldn't imagine him having a bad day, or at least or actually not blowing his stack at anyone.
No, I never. He wasn't the type to lose his temper. He had Virginia for that. She was the bad cop to his good cop.
Did you ever meet their other son?
Maybe briefly. I can't remember. He may have like stopped by while they were going for dinner. I have a vague memory of that, but I'm not really 100% sure.
What do you do for a living?
I don't remember. Because John used to stop by. John Jr. used to stop by all the time. Sometimes they'd all go out to dinner or whatever.
Because what I remember reading is that John Sr. never wanted John Jr. to become a comic book artist.
Nope. I don't blame him.
Fortunately, he did fine. So.
Oh, look at that. Romita did all 3 A-Team covers. The Lethem Dalrymple ran at least 10 issues. Wow. Because I remember the Gary Panther cover. Yeah, I only have the hardcover collected edition, so I don't know how many issues it was. I thought it was like a prestige 3 issue, but yeah, I really don't know. No, yeah, nice. Good. Very cool. Right. Some neat stuff. That's cool. What issue is that? I'll hunt it down.
Did you say 93?
That's issue 89.
Oh, 89.
The New Warriors cover. First appearance, New Warriors. Got to get it.
Yeah, no, those preview magazines are not the first appearances.
Yeah, June 1990. So that was the first year I was there. I've been there less than a year. So that was good. Yeah, they must have put in that convention story just to give people hope. You know? This isn't an inside job. It wasn't a guy who's just sitting here.
Barry's funny. I don't know if I ever met.
Hello from the road, Wilson. There's Wilson.
Hey, there's Wilson. I don't know if I ever met Barry personally, but we're friends on Facebook, and you see him. He's a fun guy, but he actively buys and sells a lot of comic collections. So he's always kind of posting about that.
Barry Dutter, who was the editor at this, used to be an editor at Marvel. Like I said, he's living out in California, dealing in comics.
Yeah,
and he posts his adventures on Facebook.
I think the comic he always loves coming across, because I think it worked on, was NFL Super Pro, among like other ones that like.
Oh yeah,
I think that's the one that comes up a lot.
That's the one he always mentions that he finds.
Yeah, with the JoJo Scott cover, which is a really nice cover.
Saw that Panther. From what road that is? There are a few pages with the same approach now. Okay. Another son, Victor, was at the retirement party. That's when I met him. Okay. I may have met him there too in the retirement. And John and Virginia both retired because they couldn't take the bankruptcy and firing people anymore. It was just too rough on them. They were 65. So
yeah, that's that book, Marvel Comics: The Untold Story, which I don't give complete credence in, but seems pretty seems really well researched. It. I think they were just, I feel like the whole bullpen was like their kids, like surrogate kind of kids, right? And they felt like so attached to them and had just, without me pulling the book off my shelf, I remember them saying something. I'm paraphrasing that, like, we're telling them how well they were doing. We just had given them some of their raises.
Oh yeah,
and then
I saw how rough it was on them. I mean, it was rough on everyone.
Yeah,
but it was right.
Heartbreaking.
It's not fun to go from the boom times to having to fire people. I mean, that's crazy. And not because of anything anyone did except Ron Perlman. It was the big boss who drove it in. It was all up to the people upstairs who drove it into the ground.
Yeah, it's not common for people to work in their dream jobs, or at least their dream company.
Yeah.
And for many, many of them, including me at a certain point, that was like on the planet, that was the company I wanted to work for.
And they'd worked there for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But here's another funny thing about John Romita in his career. What's weird? First of all, what's weird is how he started as art director, because he wasn't he was hired. He didn't even have a title, because once again, Stan Lee was getting paid as art director.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what year he officially became art director. It had to be after Stan Lee went to
So
uh,
so that'll be 72.
L.A. So he was working there for years with Stan Lee collecting the art director salary, which is kind of nuts. And then the whole time, what was weird about sort of John Romita at Marvel the whole time I worked there for 1996, I don't know about anything before then, was that he really had no power in terms of usually an art director at a company like a book company or something. What the art director does is they have final say over the visuals, visual presentation of the books.
I'm glad you're mentioning this because this was my next set of thoughts to ask you about, but please.
The editor, if the editors have complete, at a book company, the editors have complete control of what goes on in the book, what goes in the book. But the art director is the one who's in charge of what that book looks like.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases, I'm sure mileage varies, but that's generally how it works. But, and I think this came out of, once again, Stan Lee being editor / art director. So he always had final say.
Right.
Even when John Romita got there, Stan Lee was the one who had final say over what all the covers looked like. He was the one telling John Romita to redraw faces. So that, like, when I was there in the 90s, John Romita had no authority over how the books looked. That was up to the editors. The editors had final authority over the cover, over the interiors, over everything. And the only authority John Romita had was his talent and personality. And there were certain editors there who wanted his input, who would go to John to get his input on stuff and listen to him. But I would say the majority of editors there ignored him. They just didn't care what he had to say because he had no actual authority, which is really strange, especially when you compare it to Virginia Romita, who had actual authority. She was in charge of the schedule. She was in charge of trafficking and production, which meant she was the one who kept the schedule of when books were going to be printed and when. And if you missed schedule, you were in for a world of hurt because Marvel was losing money. If you didn't make your deadline and she didn't make the schedule, you were in trouble as an editor. So Virginia had actual authority there. And like she was also the bad cop to John Romita's good cop. So it's like the editors were actually, they respected her authority. They were, if I always say, like, if there was a problem in the bullpen, let's just say, it was usually with an assistant editor. So an assistant editor would have a problem with someone in the bullpen. If they couldn't work it out, they'd go to Virginia. Virginia would work it out. Everything would be fine.
When you say problems, you mean like a personality conflict or just
personality conflict? It usually stems from a personality. It has to do with the work, but it stems from a personality conflict.
Right.
It usually was an assistant editor wanted more authority than they actually had.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted the rules not to apply to them. They wanted their book done. They wanted their book done now. And, there's rules. You can't just and so, and like I said, usually Virginia would sort it out. If that didn't work and they had to call the actual, the boss editor in, whoever the assistant editor's boss was, it always went like this. do whatever Virginia says. Okay, we're out of here. And because they didn't want any problems with Virginia, none. They were just like, do what Virginia says, okay. And the assistant editor would be pissed off and storm out and have to do it that way. But that's how it always. The editors wanted no problem. They wanted smooth sailing with Virginia, because a problem with Virginia meant real problems. John, on the other hand, since he had no actual authority, a lot of the editors ignored him, which I always found strange. I was like, he's right there. He could make your book, but they think they don't need an art director. And it was the boom years, so their books were doing good. So why would they think they need him? And sometimes he'd just walk in and go, I don't believe this. Oh well. What can I do? And it'd go out. Something that wasn't very good, because he didn't have the authority to tell the editor, do it right. So I always found that a little strange that, John Romita really didn't have an art director's authority, which came to a head after he left and they hired Michael Golden, who had spent the last, 10 years in the world of commercial art, and they hired him as art director. And he would try to, he eventually, after a couple of years, was like, man, they just hired me for my name. They don't want to listen to me at all. And he quit when he kind of came to that realization, like 2 years later, that he had no authority as art director, which
at
is
least it's flattering to be hired off of your name, though.
Yeah.
At least that's flattering.
But he really, Michael Golden really wanted to make a difference. He wanted things to be better. He wanted the covers to be better. He wanted
pure intentions. Yeah.
He really tried, but none of the editors wanted, because they didn't want to give up their authority. No one wants to give up their authority ever.
And I'm glad you're talking about like the actual art direction, like what was he actually directing? Because, when I think of like the second half of the 80s, when I got into all this stuff, that was when DC, putting all post-crisis, really ramping up their output.
Right.
They really raised the bar on packaging.
Right.
Production and packaging. And then, like, I think it was Dean Motter was an actual art director there, where the books had, not all of them, but a lot of books, especially when you get to the prestige format and all that stuff, like had a design aspect to it, which I really liked his aesthetic. So it appealed to me, but so in terms of counterpart at Marvel, like I'm trying to think what would be. There wasn't nearly as much design as you have now with with
Marvel had much more of a skeleton crew than DC compared to DC, so that was it too. Like,
because DC was wholly owned by Time Warner.
Another thing John Romita did was all those specialty covers in the early 90s, the foil, the embossed, he had to mark all that up. He had to do all that, because all the stuff we do in Photoshop now had to be drawn out then. So let's say like the Spider-Man embossed cover with, I think it was like a gravestone on it. He'd actually have to do a shaded pencil drawing showing how the embossing would go, so that the printer knew where to put the embossing. He would have to do if it was one with like specialty paper, not the whole thing. There's just specialty paper, but bits and pieces. He would have to do a drawing where all the bits and pieces. He'd have to figure that out and draw it all up on an overlay. That could go to the printers. That's another thing he did in the early 90s. They spent a lot of time on that stuff because there was a lot.
Oh, listen, I interned in marketing during the height of it. So it was, that was Hologram City and Foil City, man. That was, I have a certain, soft spot for a lot of stuff now, because, look what happened, but it just, some of it made sense, a lot of it didn't. But
speaking of marketing, speaking of marketing, that's one of the reasons that John Romita should have had some actual power in there, because then marketing people don't have to go to you to say, "Hey, do you have any leftover art that we can use?" Because being a part of the art director would be to create all the promotional art that would be used.
And I think he
But
did some of that stuff, but I don't know
Well,
how much.
Pal, that's a really good point, though. Like, all that fun promo stuff that was, given to comic shops, like the folded posters or anything, buttons, anything else that was standees, anything else that was outside of an actual printed comic. Someone had to be on that gig, but for all I know, it was Lou Bank or Carol Kalish, that department. But dreaming it up and just getting it distributed, but like who's actually doing the production work on it and the creative work?
Yeah, like I can remember. I don't know how much of this John, but I can remember at one point when Michael Golden was art director. I walked into his office one time. And there were some of the most beautiful drawings I've ever seen of the Avengers. And he's like, "Yeah, they're having me design some of the Avengers for the animation." And he's like, "They're never going to use it." He was like, and I was like, "Wow, these are beautiful." And he's like, "Oh, they're never going to use them." But they were really some of the best Michael Golden drawings I've seen. I wish I had made a copy of them. Because who knows where they are now, but they were gorgeous. And they were just designs for the Avengers, the animated series. So he had it all kind of stripped down and simplified and beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful. Where are you at, Wilson? Was there a con you were going to this weekend? You mentioned that he was at a con last week. I think he might be one at this week.
Isn't Heroes Con this week? This weekend?
I don't know. Portland, Maine, mini vacation with some of my buddies, eating in places in the New England area. Okay.
Well, don't go to the Shawshank prison while you're there.
Love looking at old Marvel ages, reading about books that were supposed to go into production that never got released. Yeah, that's always fun. That's so interesting. Yeah. Like I said, I always found it strange that he really had no power there. And could be easily ignored, and a lot of people did, because I was like, huh?
At these companies, I mean, I think it's probably pretty rare now, but like I think there was a long era of companies, whether it be NBC or Marvel, or like where there are certain individuals who just kind of land in a certain spot that's kind of created for them,
right?
And they're like lifers there. In a role, and eventually I think the cookie crumbles in a way that like, okay, they don't really have much of a power or anything, but they're so beloved,
right?
And the newer generations respect them so much that it's like fun to kind of wander in and listen to stories at the very least, and they have like,
listen, that was the only authority he had, his talent and the fact that people loved him. Those were the people who would listen to him. But there was those who didn't. I was like, okay.
It's like, I think we've all worked at companies where we can feel the times are changing around us. Where like at one point, when you start somewhere, you might be part of like, okay, we're the new guard and like everyone's listening to us. And like the new car smell wears off,
right?
As they say. And then, there's a certain point, like, okay, I'm no longer the new person they're listening to. Now there's these new people, and the business is changing, and the department's changing. It's within the dynamics of a workplace can change in a second when someone leaves the company, gets let go. So then there's kind of a shuffle. I've worked at companies in the kind of like the pop culture collectible space where a certain person leaves on their own, or is, let's say, removed, and within a moment, they no longer have any power here or over me, or they're it's everything has just changed. So that might have been a slow. I don't know. I couldn't comment what happened with Jeremy Senior, but like the 95, 96, as you mentioned, that was like a key for the industry, especially for Marvel. That was just gut-wrenching.
I'm sure they looked at each other and said, "What are we doing here? This is no fun anymore.
Yeah.
We're 65 and it's miserable," because it was miserable. I mean,
Yeah.
the place was half empty. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was, I mean, remember my perspective, and this is not really important because there's so many people who
Right.
lost their jobs. I lost my job before I had a job because
Right.
I thought I was going to walk
You
out of
lost the
college.
chance.
I lost my, I mean, I had another chance a decade later, but that was a whole nother story.
Right.
But
That was a decade later. You lost your
yeah.
chance for a decade.
Yeah. It's, listen, I grew up in the, in the 80s in love with like the idea of working like in 30 Rock because SNL was at its height. To me at that point, Letterman was there. I thought that would be an awesome place to work. Working for the Howard Stern show or working on Marvel, working at MTV,
Right.
all these places. I was so in love with that idea of being in those places. It seemed like fun houses to me. Marvel was, at least when I was an intern, like from an insulated point of view.
Let me see if I can find. I'll tell. Oh, there we go. I'll tell this story again, even though I've told it before. May as well get all my John Romita stories in one place.
Of course.
This is my geekiest moment at Marvel. Let me share my screen. There we go. And you can see the date on there, 5/1/90. This is a John Romita drawing when he was where's a piece of I have a piece of it. Here's a sheet of Marvel comic paper, and it's got blue lines on it up there where it says Marvel Comics books and stuff. And Marvel would hand this out to the artists so that they did the artwork the right size. Because if you don't hand out the artists the right size paper, it can come back any size. So in order to facilitate the production of comics, Marvel and DC would hand out paper. Now the problem is that pencilers like some tooth to the paper. They like it to be rough, and inkers like the paper to be super smooth. So John Romita, as you can see up there, that's Strathmore, was working with Strathmore to get sort of the best compromise paper to get a new batch printed up. That's what this is. This is John Romita testing paper. You can see Plaza Artist Supplies is where we got, and we heard the story of this paper from Wilson a while ago, where it was, we didn't realize that Marvel bought this paper from Strathmore, but then Plaza Art Supplies are the ones who put the blue lines on it. I never knew that until Wilson told me that, and he found that out just by accident when Plaza closed and another place took it over and couldn't do it well anymore. And Wilson happened to be like going into that other art store at the time when they were making the Marvel paper. And he's like, what?
I'd imagine that this being 1990 at the height of, this stuff, that
right.
The paper order was pretty significant.
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, Strathmore sold this as the Marvel paper. Like DC used to buy it too.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was, I think it had to do with how many times they run it through. Because when you make paper, it's all like it's all pulp, and you put it together on a screen, and then you roll it through presses of some kind to flatten the paper. And this was like hot press paper is rolled through like 10 times, and cold press paper is rolled through like 2 times. And this was rolled through, I don't know, maybe 6 times. They had to do, like I said, they had to make it special for Marvel. And John Romita was testing the paper to figure out, to put the order in. As you can see here, right there where it says Speedball, that's a Speedball nib. So he was testing it with brush, he was testing it with pen, he was testing it with nibs. He was doing, I love this water he did over here, testing it by drawing 2 faces. So my geekiest part is, like, this is from 1990. Now picture it's now, let's say March of 1992. And Marvel was on the 10th floor of 387 Park Avenue South. This was when they redid the whole 10th floor. I was talking before about how John Romita's office got changed. This is that time. So Marvel had to move from the 10th floor down to the 4th floor, which was much smaller. So everything had to be moved down there. So it happened one day, over the weekend. They called a whole bunch of movers in. They moved all the furniture, all the equipment, everything down to the 4th floor. So I'm down on the 4th floor. I had to go into John Romita's office for some reason. I don't even know why. And so I'm in John's office talking to him. By the way, this is the size paper it's on. It's from here to here. So it's on like a 17-inch sheet of paper. He just drew on the top of it. So as I'm talking to him, I noticed this on his desk. And then, I'm talking, I just like, wow. And of course, they're really nice drawings. I was like, wow. And as we're talking, like I said, just got moved down there. So he's obviously cleaning up and reorganizing his office. So he picks that up and throws it into the trash can as I'm talking to him. And right in the middle of the conversation, I went, "You don't want that? Can I have that?" And he looked at me like I just grew an extra head and went, "Sure, kid," and pulled it out of the garbage can and handed it to me. And I was just like, cool. Like, I've kept it ever since, because and a matter of fact, it even showed up you can get your own copy of it in John Romita Visionaries, because when they were looking to put this book together, Corey Settlemeyer was asking if anybody had any John Romita artwork. So don't I have this marked? Well, I thought I did. Now it's in a wrong spot. There we go. So I gave him a scan of it, and you can get your own copy of it in this book here. And it says, what is it? Doodles to Test Artboard. So that was my geekiest moment at Marvel. When I went there, and when I blurted, it was like I couldn't even help myself. I just blurted that out. "You don't want that? Can I have it?" "Sure, kid." I'm not even saying if he said "sure, kid," but he should have.
Well, if he had patted your head.
There was no reason not to. But like he threw it away right in front of me.
I'm glad that you still have it. That's a great thing to have, is
right
for the grave.
And this other one up here, the story of that, which I've told on before, but I may as well tell it to get it all in one place, was that little Spider-Man drawing was this Greg Baz, I think his name was, used to work at M&M Comics, my local comic shop.
Oh yeah.
And one day it was when those Spider-Man hologram covers were coming out, where there was like a 4-inch hologram stuck on the cover. Well, they got one with, this is before sketch covers, they got one with no hologram on it. And Greg was like, "Could you ask John," he knew I worked at Marvel, like, "Could you ask John Romita to draw a Spider-Man head in this for me? I'll pay him whatever he wants." I said, I usually didn't ask John for stuff, but I was like, I'll ask him, because so I went in there and said, John's like, sure, I'll do it. And he finished it, and he comes over to me, I always overdo it. Here you go. And I was like, wow. I didn't want to give it back. I took a photocopy of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's great.
This is in that hologram spot. I mean, just look at how nice that is.
Yeah.
That is just a beautiful, once again, this is one of the reasons I think he's even a better artist than he is a comic book artist. Because he is so good at making, besides being good at comics, he is so good at just making images.
By the way, on the page you just showed, the opposite page was the Wolverine concept.
Yes,
drawings.
The Wolverine designs.
Yeah,
and the Punisher designs.
I first saw the Wolverine designs in '86. They did that reprint of Hulk 181 and maybe 180 also 181 and 182. It was just called The Incredible Hulk Wolverine. It was just a one shot. It was one of the earliest comics I bought from a comic shop, because it's probably like summer of '86. And I saw those prototype kind of, concept sketches. I thought that was really cool.
His influence is like Joe Kubert's influence is outsized from his actual comic book work, so is John Romita's, because he designed that classic Wolverine costume. He designed the Punisher costume too, which has gone on to be everywhere. So it's like any one of those. If you did it, you'd be dining out on it for the rest of your life.
Listen, if you can see it with the Punisher, you can see the skull with the actual like ammunition,
Right.
magazines that come up as the teeth. Great design.
Yeah, it's amazing. He did so much outside of his actual comic work. It's amazing how much. It really is.
And in reading, like, I'm glad he got a lot of press, or I really should say the press, did a lot of coverage at, deserving coverage, like in New York Times and, mainstream press. But, the mentions of the little bit of work he did pre-Marvel or pre-Timely, for DC, like, I'm not even sure if I've seen any of that stuff. Paulo, do you know what that is? What did he do any mainstream DC superhero stuff, or is it? We know he did the romance comics elsewhere.
Yeah,
right?
I don't think he ever did any superheroes. He went for the romance. He was at Atlas when they had the implosion, and he was doing westerns. He had his own series, The Western Kid. Although I think that was in the early 50s, but that was before Captain America, actually. But at DC, he mostly did romance. I don't think he was in any, and I don't think he wanted to be in a superhero.
No, I think he liked the romance stuff.
Well, Jared, when someone is a work for hire freelancer, like in this, like a pencil or inker, right? What is the trend? Now, this was in the mid '60s, but what do you what is the transition to becoming like on staff, like I'm quoting it, 9 to 5 role? Is it do you think Stan Lee approaches him with that? Do you think he's like, hey, I'd really like the stability and benefits of being on staff?
He was. I was actually just reading about this in this Father and Sons book that I gave some information for. It's about John and John Jr. And I haven't read all through, but I was reading his early days, and he really wanted a staff job.
He pushed for it. Okay.
And I think Stan offered him one. And at the same time, Jack Kirby offered him a job working with, I think Jack had just moved, because when Jack Kirby lived in Long Island, sometimes, like on Fridays, Stan Lee, John Romita, and Jack Kirby used to drive home together to Long Island.
What? I was just laughing about what a car ride that was.
Yeah. So Jack Kirby, I think, had moved to LA at that point, and he offered John Romita a job. He'd have to move out to LA. And he'd be, because Jack wanted to do more comics, and he wanted to write and edit some of them that John Romita would draw. So at that time, and he was thinking about doing it. According to the book, it was Virginia who talked him out of it, who said, "You really shouldn't do that because you're not as strong as personality as Jack. You'll end up just being in Jack's shadow, and I don't know if you want that." And around that same time, Stan Lee offered him the Marvel job, so he took that.
Yeah.
So he could have moved, and like I said, he was thinking about doing it until Virginia was like, I don't know if that's the job for you. And I could see her point.
Because did Virginia and John Sr. meet in Marvel? Do they?
Oh no, they were from the old neighborhood. I think they met in high school or something. They have them meeting in the book too. But yeah, I think I was always told they were high school sweethearts.
Did she work in publishing elsewhere before Marvel, or just?
I don't think so. I think she was raising the boys, according to the book. I haven't gotten to the point in the book where she gets a job at Marvel.
What book are you talking about, by the way?
What's the name? It was just kickstarted. Matter of fact, he kickstarted a Princess Leia book of something about her and a John and Jack book. Let me see, what's the name of it? I put it on my hard drive too.
So if it's Kickstarter, did you read this from like a preview chapter or?
He actually asked me some questions, and I sent him a blog that I hadn't published yet, but I wrote about Virginia and her role at Marvel. And he asked me a few questions at Marvel, because he didn't know anything about Virginia at Marvel. So there it is. Father and there. Let me. Like I said, I just have a preview PDF of it, but I'm going to be getting the actual book because I kickstarted it. Well, actually, I'm getting the PDF of the book, not the oh great, it's not. But anyway, I can't share it. But it's named Father and Son Issues: The Secret History of Spider-Man by Jeff Ryan. And it's not out yet, but the Kickstarter was successful, and I imagine you'll be able to get it other places eventually. But like that's where I was reading about the early years of John, which I didn't know a ton about. There we go.
And they're
Father and Son Issues, Jeff Ryan.
Are they're from Queens or Brooklyn or?
Yeah, they're from the city. I forget where in the city. Yeah. They must be Queens, since they were on Long Island all that time. So yeah, they were out in Long Island even. I think they may have, I don't know where they grew up, but they ended up in Long Island because that's where Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were. Let me see. I want to show you something else. Just to show you, everyone's got one of these. This, I believe, was Bob Wyachek's. I scanned it in for him. I think John Romita drew this for him. I don't know if he was on a tour or it was a con. I don't remember the story. But Bob Wyachek has had this Spider-Man drawing from John Romita since, I don't know, the late 60s.
I was going to say, because I see a lot of shades of Ditko in that.
Yeah,
not just the webbing beneath the arms, like the
position, the pose looks
eyes.
like he's still doing Ditko in that.
Yeah,
so I found that one interesting. But yeah, just lots of people. He was nice to Bob Wyachek when Bob Wyachek was young.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll do another retrospective. That book that you held up, I think it's not too old. Like I think I've definitely seen.
I think they've had another printing of it. And here, I don't know where I got this one from.
I mean, he drew the death of Gwen Stacy issues, yeah.
Yeah, that was him.
Okay.
No, did he ink them? He inked this one. The one I've got right here. Here's another. I don't know where this is also from Bob Watt to Robert. So this is when he was young. So I think he got this when he was a kid. This one might be from when he was on a tour. Bob Wyachek got this one from John Romita. Held it all. Another one he held all these years just to. Well, that's a pretty neat little Spider-Man drawing.
For sure.
John Romita.
Love the eyes on that.
Yeah. But yeah, just another fun little, a lot of people of John Romita drawings. He was always sketching over people's stuff. He's always giving out stuff at cons.
Oh, your fellow bullpenners, those past few days have been posting so much stuff that he would.
Oh yeah.
like
Everybody's got a John Romita was nice to me.
Painted no, but there's pieces he would do, like painted portraits and like full unbelievable stuff that is like, we'd be like, oh, I really need to do that, and just you just had so much kind of joy in doing it. I think for
Francine Grillo's Going Away card.
That's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah. I need to go back and look at the Marvel Tales comics I have, and because I had it for a run, where they would just repurpose the original covers, and then you remember, then they kind of because I'm sure the sales were kind of flagging on it when you get into the early '90s. So they were reprinting some Punisher stuff. So they had Zek do new covers, and then they had McFarlane do some Marvel Tales covers. But I kind of like the original reprints of the original covers.
Looks like the first printing of this is 2005.
Man, time flies, I'll tell you.
I think they've had another printing since then, but I don't know how long ago it was.
I tell you that his rendition of the Green Goblin, I think, is still like the Mago figure from the 70s of Green Goblin. His eyes are so distinctive.
All right. There's also this one, the Romita Legacy from Dynamic Forces. What year was this?
Covering both of them. That covers Junior, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looked like it.
First American edition, 2010. But there's lots of, this one's got some old 50s stuff from John Romita and some J.R. Jr. stuff. Some nice layouts from John, from one of the romance comics. Those romance comics covers he did were wonderful.
I'd be curious to know, dig up the sales figures and that stuff. I mean, the height of that stuff was maybe in the 50s and early 60s.
Oh, yeah.
So I think they sold a ton. But Paulo, do you have any insight?
50s romance comics were one of the best sellers, yeah.
Yeah, what I remember is that the early 70s was when the girls stopped reading comics because either because the novels were now cheaper, or because they could watch now soap operas on TV.
Mm-hmm.
Something else got their attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Or maybe
when people say that comics started selling badly because of the Comics Code, that's bullshit. Comics started selling badly because all of a sudden everybody started having a TV at home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You gotta look at what else was going on, right?
Yeah.
Also in the 70s, we were talking about female readership, like my understanding always is the 70s was the golden age of magazines, where that was the height of everything. And so you think of stuff like not Young Miss. What am I thinking of? Like the teeny bopper kind of magazines.
Mm-hmm.
What am I thinking of, Jared? What magazines were big in the 70s for female?
Tiger Beat.
Tiger Beat. Thank you. That kind of stuff, like the Teen Idol kind of stuff. That was huge.
There was another thing that for the retailers, those magazines, they were more expensive and they had more pages. And comics, even though they started going up in price like crazy, with the going from 15, 20, 25 cents, they were still too cheap, and the retailers stopped caring.
Yeah.
They didn't want to get the comics. And when those weirdos started showing up, like Robert Beerbohm started showing up saying, "Oh, I'll buy those off of you, and you can declare that you destroyed them."
Here's another Romita comic, a Romita cover I like. The original art for it here. I found a scan somewhere online. There we go. Crypt of Shadows number 12. I mean, that's a great image. Looking through the inside of a skull.
What is this? Is this Marvel?
This is Marvel.
Yeah, Crypt of Shadows.
I've never heard of this comic. I mean, I've heard a lot of
It's one of their 70s horror reprint titles.
Right.
Yeah,
I
They
see.
used to reprint the 50s stuff in there,
right. And there
but
was
they
an
usually did new
occasional new
covers.
story. But
Very,
look at, I even like
sometimes.
the keys in his hand down here. Look at that nice little
Mhm.
detail.
So this series might have like some of the Kirby monster stuff, maybe.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
No, even before that, it had
Okay.
the 50s stuff before the Atlas implosion.
Ah, okay.
You'll find Joe
Yeah.
Manili in some of. See how that Ron Wilson cover reminds you of the other one with the werewolf.
Ah, yeah. You're right. Well, nice image on that one. He just he to me his covers are. He's got a lot of memorable covers as well as a lot of memorable images. Like that. Is this one John Romita? Yeah, that one's John Romita. Even
Yeah,
that
that was
cover.
used all over the place.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is I've seen that like on you know like school folders and stuff back in the 70s.
Right,
I
right.
feel like
Trapper Keeper folder.
yeah, that
Just
was
tons and tons of memorable images.
and that's what I mean by the licensing. Like just like I don't know if there's ever was a style guide maybe, but he basically was unknowingly making a style guide all that time for licensing, you know. So
Another one of my favorite John Romita stories, which again I've told before, but I want to get them all in one place, was one time he was just hanging out in the bullpen chatting with us, and somehow we're talking about the comics code. And he was telling do you know the chapter in Seduction of the Innocent that's called Pictures for Children Who Know How to Look?
I don't know much about that book except for
okay. Well, in
the
book,
title and the author.
Wortham points out hidden penises in comic books. How there was such a bad influence because they would hide penises, drawings of penises in the comic. And John Romita was like, "Oh my God, I always thought he was seeing things. He was crazy." But then he was talking to one of the artists and was like, "No." And the artist, like from those days, and the artist was like, "No, we used to do that all the time."
I was going to say it sounded legit to me.
From the drawings.
Yeah, it sounded legit.
Like, I defended him for years and years and years. I'd say that Wortham was crazy. Turns out that they were doing it. Pictures for children who know how to look. I always loved that little line. Children are getting corrupted because they can find a picture of a penis. Wortham was right.
Yeah.
Tiger Beat. Tiger Beat. Yeah, my sisters used to get those.
Did Romita ever tell you how he started working in comics?
No, I don't think he ever told us that.
Okay, so there was this guy called Les Cavern, and he usually got art assignments from the publishers. He'd go, "Do you have something for me to pencil?" Sure. The thing is, he never penciled a comic in his life. He would just sign it. He would hire ghost artists to do all the layouts and breakdowns for him, and he would just ink it and sign it.
I think that might be in the Father and Son book. I remember
and he did that with Romita in 1951.
I remember him saying something about he's like, I may as well do it myself because I'm already doing it for this guy or something like that.
Yeah,
because he was looking to get hired for a job, but he had no work to show them because he wasn't credited on anything or something like that. Yeah, I'll have to reread the book and see.
Jared, as an aside, but sort of tied into, how did you have to interview with him? How did you get your job? And how do bullpenners in general get their job? I'm sure there's a lot of paths to that, but did you have to sit down with Virginia or with John? And just like,
first of all, once again, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Ed Murr got there first. And I always say, Ed always was and still is much more of a go-getter than me. And we both graduated college at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
December of 1988, school friend of mine. And he moved to the city immediately because if you knew his parents, he has to move so he moved to New York City out in Brooklyn because we had a friend, Dave, who his grandmother just died, and she had a place out in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. So I think it was Bay Ridge. Anyway, so Dave moved out there into his grandmother's old house, and he needed roommates. So he said, Ed, got cheap rent for you. So Ed moved into the city. And like I said, Ed was a go-getter. He must have, this is 1989, spring into the summer of 1989. And he was looking everywhere for a job. Like I said, we're fresh out of college. We're months out of college. He's looking everywhere for a job. One of the places he applied to was Marvel Comics because he's a comic book fan. Why not apply to Marvel Comics? And sure enough, that's the only place that hired him. He's like, all the other jobs were just like, no. So he ended up getting hired at Marvel Comics. And then,
but do you know who did he actually?
What was that?
Who did he actually have to meet with though to be like, yeah,
He
okay,
was Virginia.
That's what I'm saying. Like to be like, okay, you seem like you're not a serial killer,
right? So
like
then in November, he's like, Jared, they need some freelance work done here. You want to do it? And I'm like, okay. So I had to go in and meet with Virginia, and my meeting, and I find this has been the case throughout my lifetime. And Ed has recommended me for more than one job.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody says, hey, I know a guy, Jared can do this job, you've got the job before you walk in.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to not be a mental case.
Right. That's right.
The person
yours to lose.
You, the person vouching for you matters more than anything. So it's like my interview with Virginia was like, oh, you can do this? Yeah, I took this class and you have a degree? Okay, well, come right in. And so then I started working there. I only worked there a couple of days, and then they needed me like a month later, but I was already doing something else. And Ed was like, listen, if you say you can come in next time, they'll have more work for you. So I was just like, so next time I'm like, all right, I can come in. I just if they called me at 9:00, I couldn't make it into the city in half an hour. I'm 2 hours outside the city by public transportation. 30 miles away. I could make it in half an hour any direction but New York City.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
So, but eventually, like, Virginia was great to me because she was married to John and had John Jr. as her son. She understood artists. She understood freelance. She understood artists. She understood creatives. So I'd be there for 3 months and like, Virginia, I can't take it anymore. I have to leave. She's like, okay, bye. And then I'd call back 2 months later and say, Virginia, you need some help? She's like, sure, come on in. And that's how it went for the 6 years I worked with Virginia. She would just always, because it was and also because, as she always said, I don't need anyone watching over me. I don't need anyone to motivate me. You don't have to. I always think it's my job to make my boss's job easier. That's my whole job. No matter what the job is, if I make my boss's job easier, I'm in. So she was always happy to see me, always happy to. And also, I didn't get burnt out like everyone else, because that job was for, that would burn you out, pasting up comics all day. So close to the job you want to do, drawing comics, but so far away because you were pasting up comics all day. And especially in the early 90s, until things got computerized, the editors had a real sort of prejudice against people working in the bullpen. They saw them as lesser than. They saw the job as like every workplace has a job that's lesser than. Every workplace has a pecking order. And there are jobs that are at the bottom of the pecking order. And the bullpen jobs were the ones at the bottom of the pecking order. And it's like, as long as you were in the bullpen, you were never going to get freelance work from any of the editors. You had to quit, get some work somewhere else, and then go back in and use your connections to get work.
Yeah.
That's just the way it worked. Who am I thinking of? I can't remember. I can't remember his name. He died 10 years ago too. He was around my whatever. I'll remember his name later. But he was a bullpenner before me, a few years before. So he still would, and he wanted to be an inker. He was a pretty good inker, but he couldn't get inking work because he was a bullpenner. Eventually, a few years later, he came back. He got hired as an assistant editor because he had connections. He was well liked. Someone, I forget who his assistant editor was. Once he was an assistant editor, other editors started giving him inking work.
I'm trying to think who that was. He passed away, huh? I'm trying to think.
I can't remember his name. Young guy too. I'll remember his name eventually, but for some reason, Harry Candelario's name is blocking his name right now. Mm-hmm. That's not who. Well, Harry Candelario was another bullpenner before me who had to quit and then go other places and get work.
Is it just because you have like a stigma? Oh, he's a bullpenner. He can't.
You know what it was? Since all we were doing was pasting balloons down, the editors had like they're like, anybody can do that. I could do that. Mm-hmm. But once it became computerized, once it became desktop publishing, they now had no idea what we were doing. So they respected it then because it was working on the computer. Same exact job done on a computer, got more respect because they couldn't do it. Yeah, they couldn't say, well, I could do that. So that Marvel being computerized changed the culture of how the editorial looked at the bullpen. It really did. It was weird.
I think Wilson's got the name there.
Hector Collazo. Yeah, there we go.
I know that name.
Thanks, Wilson. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Hector Collazo. Which you now know why Harry Candelario was blocking his name for me. He was blocking Hector Collazo's name in my head. Those HC guys. Hello there, sleepy reader. Yeah, I remember even talking with Hector about it because when he came back, I'm like, "Hey, Hector, how you doing?" Because I knew him because it was weird that right before I got to the bullpen, there was a lot of turnover. A lot of the guys who were there in the late 80s left and went freelance, and they hired a bunch of new people, myself and Ed. And by the way, after Ed and I got in, we got in other classmates. My friend John Bunch, that's how he first started there. Matt, Feng Ming. There's like half a dozen of us SUNY Purchase people were working in the bullpen just because they said, you need something. Do you know somebody? Sure. I mean that's how the world works.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've benefited from that, and other times I've felt like it's hurt me because I feel like
once you don't know people,
right? That's right. Yeah.
I even tell my students that I'm like, make friends. I'm like,
yeah. I mean, to go
right now, they're like, oh, I'm like, you don't understand. When you get in someplace, you got to get her in. That's how it works.
To go off on that tangent a little bit, I don't mean to. I'll tie into like Marvel internships. So, like, I didn't go to college in the city. I went to college like in Delaware, right? So, I, growing up, like I always knew the term summer internship. And that's what I did, summer internships when I was back in New Jersey and be able to commute into New York. But it didn't even occur to me that, these kids who go to college in the city, they have the opportunity to intern year round.
Yeah.
and get in the door year round. Like, so you had these interns. Oh, I go to like FIT, I go to SVA, I go to Parsons, I go to Pratt. And
Have a good one, Wilson. He's got to
later. So when you talk about like it's who you know, it's like, but they also have the opportunity to intern a year round and really get your foot in the door in multiple companies.
Right.
You know, if I had gone to school in the city, I could tell you I would push to intern at Marvel, which I ended up doing anyway, and probably MTV and some other places I level to working. You know, if one didn't work out, maybe the other would. Right. So, but yes, that ties into John Romita Sr. It's like I didn't know, like, you know, who would have interviewed with him, his Raiders.
Yeah.
And trying to think of who else who might like have been like, okay, he's the kind of gatekeeper for decision maker in that sense, you know.
Funny, no computer sounds easier now.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
Let me see. Let me check my notes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you prepared for this?
Yeah. Sorry. I just wrote down a few John Romita things.
Yeah.
Oh, there's something that I found out through John Romita. I can remember one of the first things I asked him. I don't know. I just had to know this. Was about the covers in a box from the early 70s.
Do you mean the design?
The design.
Like the black border around them?
The black border. And I was like, okay. John, what? Because I'd never read anything about them. And I always liked them, probably because Gil Kane did a lot of them.
Right.
There's a lot of talent doing them. But I was like, John, why did you put that? Why? What one of it? And he said that it was for Marvel. It was for a 10th anniversary. He couldn't remember what the 10th anniversary was.
Mm-hmm.
Was it 10th anniversary of Fantastic Four? 10th anniversary of Spider-Man? So we just settled on Marvel 10th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like to this day, I'm the only one who knows that story. I find it strange. I've never read it.
I wouldn't associate with an anniversary because how long was that black box format?
A year. It almost lasted.
Yeah, because I remember Tom Brevoort running a blog. This could have been a decade ago, talking about those covers and him not like because they had really big. I think he thought they were kind of obnoxious. They had really big.
I've read people saying they don't like them. I know they divide people, but I've never heard anyone ask why they did it. I was the only one who I know, so that's why I had to ask John that.
I would have never guessed. I would have never guessed it was an anniversary thing because there was no kind of badge on them. It had I thought maybe it was kind of a tactic, a newsstand tactic to stick out or something. I never really realized.
They did it from, which is probably why nobody asks but those are Marvel. So I always refer to them now as the Marvel 10th anniversary books.
Wow, I would have never have thought that. I don't know if anyone because it's just black, right? Like it's not like some kind of.
Sometimes it's the color.
Oh, really? Like I don't know, like blue or red or something.
Yes, I've seen them color, and it kind of got looser as the year went by until it ended up with like not quite as strict, and then they disappeared. But yeah, those were the Marvel 10th anniversary because it's the only time there was any real design for Marvel covers.
Right.
Like a sort of unifying design. That's why I was curious.
How long did they do that?
Funny that I'm the only one who ever asked that question, as far as I know. That's just weird to me.
Paulo, in the corner boxes when they had like a pop art production, how was that? Very short lived.
Very short lived. I don't think it went up to 6 months. I think it was about 3.
And was it just to tie into a kind of like that term that was getting hot around that time with?
Yeah, it was. I think it was Stan's idea.
Okay.
Because the corner box was Ditko, but
no, the putting Marvel pop art productions instead of Marvel Comics, that was Stan.
Right. Yeah. But the corner box itself was Ditko.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of the pop art covers I was collecting last year when all of a sudden, the Archie had a couple pop art covers. The Bunny comic I discovered had a few that she's was latest, the pop art something or other. So I think pop art in the mid to late 60s, I think comics were trying to exploit that term.
Mm-hmm. Well, though, I mean, I think of Andy Warhol, Peter Max, and then I can't think of his name.
Liechtenstein.
Who's reviled by many comic artists. Those are the three that come to mind.
They've got a Liechtenstein set of stamps coming out. None of his comic book imagery on it, though.
As an aside, tomorrow I think going to the New York Historical Society for the J.C. Leyendecker exhibit.
Oh, cool!
Yeah, so I'll try to take some pics of that.
He's one of back when I was in art school, especially when I was in illustration my first 2 years. He was one of my favorites.
The only original piece I've seen of his is one at the Society of Illustrators. When you go up the stairwell, there's a piece in the stairwell. But I'm almost embarrassed to say I had no idea he was up until probably 10, 20 years ago. I definitely had seen his art, but because he was a big influence on Frank Sirocco, along with probably who I love is Frank Sirocco's art, who I first saw like on Defenders or Alien Legion, maybe. And he's probably a very big influence on many other artists as well. But then I learned, okay, this is the guy who preceded Norman Rockwell,
right?
So that should be. I don't know how expansive the exhibit is, but
it's funny because I knew him because when I was in school, I had a friend and a roommate who was really into him too. It's like we would always go and look up those old guys, which is funny because like I said, I was in art school 84 to 88.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I can't remember the guy's name. We rejected all the 60s illustrators. Like I can't remember his name. He's one of the last big illustrators. Like Walter Simonson was influenced. It's like everybody who's like a generation older than me was influenced by them. Who growing up in the 60s, they did a lot of these TV guide covers and things. Real sort of abstract, messy.
Bob Peak.
Bob Peak.
Yeah.
Oh, we hated Bob Peak because
he was a huge influence on Sienkiewicz.
Yes. But it's like I'm talking us as students in like the early to mid 80s, because it's like we were rejecting all the stuff from the generation before us,
right? Yeah,
and going back to sort of the older classic stuff like Leyendecker.
Bob Peak did Apocalypse Now. He did a lot of movie stuff, but he did Rollerball.
Couldn't stand him. We couldn't even look at his stuff. We were just like,
what was it about it that was so off-putting?
It looked old-fashioned to us, which is funny because the 60s was old-fashioned, but the 1910s and 1920s was cool old-fashioned.
I peg you as loving Bob Peak. This is why, because the more refined, tighter stuff. Leyendecker was a little, had a loose brushstroke within a tight kind of shape. He had then a loose, almost like impasto at times, sort of, technique. But do you still not like Bob Peak, or is it
I'm still not a Bob Peak fan.
Okay.
Still not a Bob Peak.
I'm
not a fan of like that whole 60s era, that sort of commercial psychedelic.
I can tell you
psychedelic. It's like the commercial version of psychedelic 60s art.
I could tell you that Peak stuff, that some of it, I'm not the hugest fan of the color palette. Something about it is like muddy and to me. It ranges from piece to piece, but
yeah. Leyendecker, J.C. Leyendecker. Were you guys looking? Yeah, we were looking at some Wyeth, but he was like the grandfather Wyeth, right? He's NC. He was even a little too old for us. But Leyendecker was one of our favorites.
Yeah.
Jason. And it's funny, like I said, this is in 1984.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, and even in like 1984, there was no talk of Leyendecker being gay. There was almost no talk of anyone being gay. This was still, in 1984, it was still kept quiet.
There was a recent documentary on the MTV Films did, I believe, it was on Paramount Plus about him. Did you see that? You know what I'm talking about?
No.
I watched it. It's pretty short. It might be half hour, 45 minutes at most. But basically, it's about the kind of hidden innuendos, or maybe not so subtle innuendos in a lot of his work of like guys giving each other a little kind of winks.
Like I said, there was no talk of Leyendecker being gay. You really didn't talk about gay in 1984, even in an art school. But I was always like, I always suspected he was because his guys were so pretty. His like men.
Oh, they were greased. They were all greased up.
Oh yeah,
to get those.
He just paints the prettiest men ever. So that always made me go, he might be gay, even though I probably wouldn't even think gay out loud in 1984. It just wasn't talked about much.
With the Indiana Jones movie coming out, I mean, we most associate Drew Struzan with those posters, right? But the guy who did the original poster, I mean, one of the originals, the really famous indie shot with him with the whip kind of twirled around him, that was Richard Amsel.
Okay.
Who did? I think he passed away. I think in the mid '80s. Possibly one of the last things he did was the Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome poster. But had he not passed away, I think him and Struzan would have been like this in terms of like who's the most sought after poster artist. Him and this guy John Alvin, who did a lot of. Who's still around.
I haven't looked at N.C. Wyeth in a while, but I think I have a vague memory of him being a little too 19th century for me. It's like N.C. Wyeth was like a little 19th century, and Leyendecker was like beginning of the 20th century, everything modern and sleek. I always wanted to paint like Leyendecker, but never could. His male figures were gorgeous,
But again, to tie it into comics, I first heard J.C. Leyendecker's name because I saw that Frank Sirocco cited him as a influence, and I used to love his Sirocco's Defenders covers and his Alien Legion stuff. And he has this FC signature in a box, which is very design heavy, and so it's only really within the last like 10-20 years I started discovering artists that I really should have known about earlier.
Right.
By reading the influence.
Steve Rude was influenced by Leyendecker too.
Just like Charles Vess, highly influenced by what's that?
I think he's a Wyeth guy.
I'm trying to think. There's an artist. Oh God, Raff. I'm trying to think. Who influenced Charles Vess, like this 19th century kind of very pen and ink with watercolor wash sort of coloring. That was, you could clearly see the influence. But I always loved Charles Vess's stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I first saw probably the Web of Spider-Man #1 cover. That's the big one. But like, who would think an artist like that would be associated with Spider-Man? But he became very much associated with Spider-Man.
Did one of the most famous Spider-Man covers, didn't he?
Some posters and stuff too. Rackham, thank you.
There we go.
Arthur Rackham, right?
Arthur Rackham.
Mm-hmm.
That's him.
Mm-hmm.
Another of my favorite comic book quotes. This was from John Romita. This was during when the bad times were just starting, I would guess. I don't know what year it was. 95, 94.
Yeah, right in there.
And, there was all sorts of articles about the death of comics. And one day, John Romita was in talking with us, and he was like, I think I've lived through the death of comics 3 times already. And when you think about it, he had. There was the death of comics in the 50s, twice, I think, at Atlas. The death of comics were leaked once in the 70s.
It depends on the valley of the how bad the sales got during those times that you just mentioned, pre-90s. Probably it could be like there, and then get into the 90s crashing. Could be like
but the thing about the 90s is there really wasn't a crash.
It was a correction.
Yeah, And Marvel would have not been in trouble had it not been for Ron Perlman running up $300 million on their bill.
No.
Marvel would have, I mean, DC was nowhere near bankruptcy. Why? Because Marvel continued to be profitable the whole time, which is why everybody was fighting to own. Matter of fact, I can't remember what article. Oh, it was in that.
Well, DC also, remember, had that great advantage of being part of a giant corporate
but there was
entity.
something. Marvel was still profitable though. It's not like there was the comics. It was that they weren't profitable enough to service the massive debt.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was. And I can remember it was in that there was an article recently in, I forget where, the New Yorker, I think it was. Someone linked to on Facebook. It was all about I don't even know his name is forgotten now. He's the guy who hired Kevin Feige. He was the guy who got sort of Marvel Studios off the ground.
Avi.
No, not Avi. It was another guy. Matter of fact, he butted heads with Avi. That's why.
I think
you don't even know his name because he gets no credit. But he was this whole movie this whole article was about him and his part in Marvel Studios.
Was it Calabrese?
No,
Jerry Calabrese.
I don't even know if it's a name I've heard. It's not him.
Okay, I know a lot of the names, but believe it or not,
right
behind the scenes of the business side.
But he was one of the guys, and he was the one trying to convince everybody that it'd be a good idea to make Marvel Studios and make their own movies.
Yeah, it could be Robert Steffens.
That might be it. That name sounds familiar.
I have been in rooms with Robert.
Right.
I like him very much. Yeah.
But anyway, he was, he told his, at one point, I don't know if it was him or somebody else, and they were talking about Marvel's bankruptcy and talking about if they should buy it. And the quote was, Marvel is worth tons of money. He's like, Spider-Man alone is worth $100 million.
Yeah. That
was the quote he said. He's like, so you people are crazy. Spider-Man alone is worth $100 million.
Right.
You don't want to put $10 million into it? And that's how everybody, like I said, Marvel was completely profitable, their comics. Everybody was fighting to own it. When I hear things like Ike Perlmutter saved Marvel, I'm like, anybody could have. He didn't do anything special. All he did was make deals to pay off their loans, and then he paid off their loans out of Marvel's profits. It's just kind of like anybody who knows how to balance a checkbook could have saved Marvel. You didn't even need to be a huge businessman, which he wasn't. So I was like, whenever I hear that, I'm like, oh, come on. All these guys were fighting to own Marvel because they knew it was a cash cow, because Spider-Man alone is worth $100 million to the movie.
Yeah, it just hadn't been demonstrated yet. But people, it took a certain order of events for it to happen. But
well, it had to start with Ron Perlman running up $300 million on Marvel's bill and not being able to service it because he paid $25 million for Fleer Skybox, and then the card market corrected.
Mm-hmm. It was crazy. I mean, not only did they buy Fleer, you go, okay, we have a card company now, but then to buy a second one, maybe, I don't know if their plan was to somehow,
Fleer and Skybox, right?
It was, buying one, you go, okay, so we're in that business, but like to buy a second one, unless they're just trying to buy their competition, just take it off of.
The thing was, they bought it when it was announced that they bought it. We all, because all of us in the bullpen were card guys. We were comic guys. We knew the card market. We knew the comic market, and we knew we knew that the card market was down. And when we heard they paid $125 million for Fleer Sky, we gasped. We went, why? Why would anyone pay $125 million? It was like, hearing somebody just paid $5 million for a Ford Pinto.
Hey, you're talking to a guy who 1 year ago was working in NFTs. Not for long. It didn't last long, but like I was high. But I went to a company that was it's still around, but let's just say everyone knows they're not, they're shell what they used to be. But go ahead.
But it's like when the average bullpenner knows better than the guys making these $125 million deals, you got to go, what's going on at this point?
I've worked,
but they all made money off it. That's what's going on.
I have worked in several places where I was clear, obviously not in a power position, where where mistakes made far above your head affected me having employment.
Right.
Obvious mistakes, not just and it's very frustrating because it's because they can when people in those positions making those mistakes can afford to lose their jobs because they're in positions where they make a lot of money, right?
Well, and also what it is I mean, they don't want to lose their jobs, and they certainly I don't think any of those guys wanted to lose their jobs who made those mistakes or even thought they were going to lose their jobs, but after reading Comic Wars, I now know those guys all made millions off of these deals.
Right, yeah.
Personally, they made, when the deal got done, they got a little taste of the deal. Ron Perlman, off of that Fleer Skybox deal, made like $10 million. I don't know what it was. Some crazy.
I wonder how I don't know. These guys figure out ways.
Yeah.
So, I don't know why them buying something resulted in him making money, but unless
because they explain it in Comic Wars. I can't remember the mechanism, but the mechanism was they get paid as part of the deal is them getting paid for facilitating the deal. Because they're not only they've got their own business, they've got Marvel business, they got this business, so they use their business to do it. It's all designed for them to skim off the top millions.
So I mean, you survived the Marvelcution, as they called it, right?
3 of them. But I was a freelancer. That's why I was still there.
Yeah, it was different. Yeah.
Which reminded me, Paulo, I don't know if you... I just read this on one of maybe the People's History, one of my comic book groups. Some guy was talking about... There's another... Oh, it was... he was talking about Todd Klein's blog about... Artie Simic and Saul Brodsky and something. And the guy said, and he repeated this. I'd never heard this before. He repeated the story that Martin Goodman fired everybody because of a death. Were there two times of mass firings in the 50s at Marvel? Was there like an early 50s one and a late 50s one?
Yeah, the early 50s. Goodman made one of those. He put out a lot of different titles all at once, and he waited to see which ones sold and which ones didn't, and that's where the closet full of art urban legend comes from.
This guy was saying that closet full of art story wasn't real. What had happened was the reason he fired the staff guys had something to do with World War II, post-war Blue Cross, Blue Shield healthcare. Because I think it was that Blue Cross, Blue Shield was like... That was the health care I had going. I think soldiers in World War II coming home to the U.S., Blue Cross Blue Shield was their health care once they got home. And so the government had a rule where employers had to give Blue Cross Blue Shield health care to the people on staff and it had to do with World War II's era somehow. And Martin Goodman didn't want to pay for that. So that's why he got rid of his staff people. That's what this person wrote on. I don't have to find anywhere else it says that.
I've never heard that.
I mean, I can understand that.
Yeah, because that's when they they stopped having bullpens for the
Right.
creative people.
Mm-hmm.
Timely had it.
Right.
The when Vince Fago was in charge, and guys like Edwin Yarsky were there. They all worked directly for the company. They were employees. And in the 50s, that stopped, but they didn't stop only at Goodman's.
Right. Well, I think that healthcare Blue Cross Blue Shield guarantee could have a lot to do with it. Now that I know about it, I'll have to look into that. But Todd, like I said, if you do you check out Todd Klein's blog?
I usually forget.
I have him in my RSS feed, so I still use one of
Yeah.
those. But if you want to go over there, he's got something on Artie Simic and Saul Brodsky in the 50s at Marvel, I think it is. That he's going to have a 6-parter on. But he's done a real good job, like, with the lettering. He's, like, tracked letterers' careers, like, through the golden age, just looking at the lettering and try to figure out who lettered what. I don't know if you ever looked at those, but they're pretty cool.
It isn't that. It's easier to find out who the letterers were than the writers.
Yes, because like he can, especially as a professional letterer, he can examine the styles and find styles that match.
Yeah, I remember when I was buying essentials, I used to try. So let me see the difference between Sumac and what was the other one?
Rosen,
yeah, and I could tell the difference when. Now I can't remember which was, but I could tell. Oh yeah, this is Sumac, this is Rosen. I got it. It's the I's and the A's.
And that's what he does. He goes through all that stuff, but he said it gets difficult because sometimes one letterer trained another. So that the letters are similar, but not quite this. And he's like, I think this one is him, but I'm not sure. And he's used, and I think there's one, what does he call him? Ira Shaft is one of the earliest letterers at DC. He did a lot of DC stuff for decades. And there's a guy he calls Proto Shaft. Because they don't know his name, but he could tell that Ira Shaft learned lettering from that. You can tell it's not the same guy, but Ira Shaft learned lettering from this guy because he can see some of Ira Shaft's stuff he learned in this Proto Shaft guy. But then he has a hard time like telling early Shaft from Proto Shaft sometimes. So he's like, I think this is Ira Shaft, but it could be unnamed Proto Shaft. So it's interesting.
Those EC comics, so they used the guide, not the guide, the template. What would you call it?
The Leroy lettering, yeah.
And that
He's had articles about that too. Matter of fact, I just read somewhere else, I forget where, it had a Leroy lettering thing on it too.
But that's a plastic or metal thing where you would just
right,
yeah. And so I remember, first seeing reproductions of that stuff, and like, I guess you'd say now it gives it a little bit of a stiff coldness to the lettering. Right. It doesn't have that nuance and that, that kind of artistic quality to it. But it's so distinctive of those EC comics that.
It may have been on Alex J's blog, who was another design lettering blog guy. And he was talking about, he was going through the history. There was a husband and wife who were artists, designers, letterers. They were the ones, and worked on staff at DC for a while. They were the ones who lettered Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman was lettered with Leroy lettering, except at first, they weren't the first ones to letter Wonder Woman.
That's right.
With Leroy lettering. And he says you can tell when they came on because the Leroy lettering got better. And they worked, I think, all through the 40s for DC doing it. It was a whole story. I forget their names, but he put a whole blog story about them and working.
Now that you mentioned it, I mean, now that you mentioned, I have seen Wonder Woman reprint somewhere with that lettering, but also I think I've seen it in the opening to the Linda Carter show. They'd have panels that came to life, and I think the lettering was
that Leroy lettering.
Yeah.
And there was, and this couple even used, because with the Leroy lettering kit, you could add on different sizes and fonts and bolds and they were using all. That's one of the reasons he said you can tell they got better with it. Like the first guy who did it just did everything in italics. I think it was. I think all the original Wonder Woman lettering is slanted, and he just used the italic set for the whole thing. And then when they got on, they started using some bold, some italics, some regulars, some other stuff.
I remember being fascinated with comic lettering early on, just because of like I couldn't believe, as you went, you wouldn't fatigue and like the letters would get sloppier and sloppier. I guess that'd probably be true. People take a break or they have such endurance doing it,
right?
That they don't really lose quality. But
the faster they worked, the more money they'd get.
Good point. Yeah.
Before we go, let me show you one thing I got this week. Just because it was so good. Hauntology by Jeremy Juan.
This is a Cthulhu kind of.
Not really. There's a couple of monsters in it, and it's. I think, what does it say? There's 28 short stories in here. And it was really, really good. Let me show you a little of the artwork.
Yeah, for sure. I like the cover a lot.
It was a good. He's got this really sort of detailed pen and ink style. Oh, there's.
Yeah, I really like it.
But what it is. It's hard to describe these stories. I was recently reading something about American horror stories, and the person was critiquing American horror stories, saying sometimes American horror stories aren't really that horror, aren't really horror, because there's a hero who wins in the end, kind of thing. It's like a lot of horror stories around the world. A real horror story, there's no escape. That's the horror of it. And this is kind of like that in that it's, like I said, it's hard to describe. Because it's all little tiny stories, some 1 page, some 2 page, some 4 pages, but something has gone wrong with the world. What has gone wrong with the world doesn't really matter. There's just something has gone wrong with the world. And like in this one story, where is it? There's 2 pages. I will do dark things. And it's this whole story. The narrator is just saying, oh man, I don't want to go out there. I don't want to go out there. I don't want to go out there. Things are bad. I'll do dark things. I don't want to go out there. And then the second page is just this big shot of the cat with dark eyes. That lets you know something is going wrong in here too. And then there's other stories. There's this one story, the class of 18. This is the only one that takes place in 1894. I don't know why. And it's just told in narrative. She's just telling the story about how she gets to this orphanage, and then one by one, something strange is happening to all the kids, that they're all dying, they're all going crazy and turning into monsters. So it's like this sort of existential, it really captures that sort of modern existential dread where there's something wrong with the world. You don't quite know what to do about it. So you just go on with your everyday life. And the little stories are kind of horrifying like that, except in this world, there's actually something wrong. Like,
was this a Kickstarter or was this a?
No, I got this at the local. Showed up a few weeks ago, the local comic shop, and I've had my eye on it, but it wasn't until this week that I had an extra $17 for it.
Yeah.
Like this one story is just, remember this cat clock?
Yeah, sure, for sure.
It's just the cat clock ticking, and then we see blood splatter on it. And then the second page is
I think that cat clock maybe shows up in Batman Returns, Tim Burton with a Catwoman like on.
And then
wall.
the next page, the only other page is all of a sudden we see these two, one guy in a cat outfit stabbed with the other guy also stabbed, but still standing. And we don't even know what happened. We just know something went wrong. And that's what everything is. We don't know what happened, but something went wrong. And one of my favorite stories was like a 4-page one where there was a girl living in her apartment. And once again, you don't know what happened, but she's not leaving her apartment. She just keeps, but once again, she's got some sort of dread. And she's like, well, why do I have to? There's no reason to leave my apartment. No one leaves their apartment anymore. But she keeps ordering packages like from Amazon or wherever. So she's got like packages. She's like, sometimes I don't even open them and they just sit there. And then she gets a package she didn't order and opens it up and there's something terrible in there. And that's the whole story. You're just like, something's wrong. And so the whole thing was just her sort of slightly trying to cope with this existential dread of something went wrong out there. So the like I said, all the horror stories is something went wrong out there. What are we supposed to do? Kind of thing. And it just gives you little mundane day by day snippets, but really builds up the dread and the fear of it. It was very well done. Love hearing those old bullpen stories. Got to head out though. All righty, we're probably going to head out ourselves. Let Paulo get to sleep. I think I hit all my John Romita points I wanted to hit.
I'd love to hear more, like when you're able to get other fellow bullpenners.
Yeah,
join. I'm sure there's hundreds of really fun, kind of charming stories.
All my friends are Gen X and hate to talk on video.
I'm Gen X and I'm hating talking right now, but
there are exceptions. I'm just telling you, most of them I cannot. Getting people our age to talk on video is like pulling teeth, I've always found.
Hey, it's like radio. Just pretend no one's listening. That's it.
They won't talk. Like, they just, people are just, I don't know what it is about, like, younger generation. I notice it's a lot easier for. But I just noticed that with our like with everybody I know. I can remember the first time I got video chat was like in 2005.
Yeah.
And it's like Julio was the only one who would come on video chat.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't know how many years young, but it was like none of my was like, That's like, all right.
Remember in the 90s when people said, "Oh, video phone technology is coming," but turns out we don't actually have video phones. But man, and when I was a kid, I hated talking on the phone.
Right.
And I'm not seeing I'm not seeing you, and I don't know how you're standing, and if you're smiling or not, and you're sometimes, hello. That sounded so fake. So yeah, I thought with video phones, I was finally going to be able to talk normally with a person. So
like, I really think it's an age thing, unless I have to generational. Everyone I happen to know who's around my age.
Yeah.
Well, I actually put the link for this on my Facebook page, just in case anyone wanted to come in and share some John Romita stories. As you can see.
Hey, man, it's a summer Friday night, so say what you want about our lives, but
exactly. All right.
Yeah, all the 50-something people have something to do. Are painting the town red, right?
That's right.
They're all sleeping. All right, everybody have a good night out there.
All right, take care.
We'll catch you next time.
Bye.